We have a quorum. 5 minutes, mate. Everyone's down. We have apologies. We accept the apologies from...
Happy to move, Mr Chair.
Okay, rightio. And Councillor Cooper for an apology too, late apology. Moved by Councillor Walker, seconded by...
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to see if Councillor Hulse, he's contacted me in regards to... Oh, so there you go. I was just to make sure you got covered, Councillor Hulse.
I'm seeking a seconder, Councillor Hills. Well, excellent. All those in favour say aye.
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 Right, there are no declarations of interest that we know about. Confirmation of the minutes, please. 20th of June.
Happy to move, Mr Chair.
Councillor Simpson, Councillor Walker, he's on to it. All those in favour?
Aye.
There's the no petitions, no public input, no local board input, extraordinary items, none are known, and notices of motion, there are none. And we have the disposals recommendation with Anthony and Laurie and Letitia, no doubt. Not Anthony, Letitia. Welcome, Laurie, and welcome, Letitia. Right.
Thank you, Mr Chair. This morning we are presenting 12 properties which we are recommending for disposal and 2 properties which we are recommending for transfer to Watercare. Consultation with council departments, CCOs, iwi authorities and the relevant local boards has been undertaken and no issues have been raised. Just to note that the 2 properties which are recommended for transfer to Watercare will occur at market value, and they will also occur in accordance with Section 50 of the Public Works Act of transfer of a public work between 2 organisations. Happy to take any questions, Mr Chair.
The Murray impact statement seems a little bit more fulsome than normal, which is good. Is there any reason? Is that just expanding things or confirming matters, or what?
Yes, Mr Chair, we have been mindful of the fact that we have not been undertaking engagement with Mātāwaka, and it's been brought to our attention that that's an area that we could potentially improve on. To that end, Brandy Hudson has met with Roger McDonald, our CE, to talk about how we can expand in that area, and we have elaborated on the Māori impact statement to include information on that, and we'll continue to amend that and elaborate as work progresses.
And the more comprehensive framework for engaging Mātāwaka will be next meeting? Or?
It will be developed over time. As a starting point, Mr Chair, as I mentioned, Roger McDonald has met with Brandy Hudson. We'll continue working with our stakeholder engagement team and working on that.
Excellent. Right, we have Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, this is great work. It's very full information. I feel like we can make good decisions on this. I'm also thankful that the local boards have been so supportive. But there's the questions on the ones that are properties or dwellings. So it's obviously been looked at that it makes more financial sense to sell than to keep the... We obviously get revenue from the rent of those properties.
Through the Chair, yes we do. We are operating on the basis that the decision was made in the last round of the LTP that where there are surplus properties which are not delivering a council service use or infrastructure purpose, that they be considered for divestment. And so that's the basis that we're operating on. Though with the properties in question here...
No, thanks, Letitia. I mean, a couple of questions that arise out of the ones that are being put forward for sale that are reserves, and I realise that the local boards agree with it, and in a couple of these cases they were recommended for sale in legacy council days. But just a couple of general questions that arise from that in terms of sites like this. The proceeds of that have to go into a reserve fund, but those proceeds don't necessarily acquire new reserve land. They could just be used for maintenance of existing reserves. Is that correct?
Yes, through the Chair, it's a requirement of the Reserves Act 1977 that where reserves are sold, the proceeds of sale are maintained in reserves accounts for either the acquisition of future reserves or the maintenance of existing reserves.
Okay, so I guess That's obviously a decision for Parks, Mr Chair, but I guess what I'm signalling here is that I don't really think maintenance of existing reserves in an era when the population's going up, there's far more intensification, is satisfactory. It should be for the acquisition of that value within that general area. Just in terms of the number of sites, there's a lot of sites like this across Auckland, you know, where there's a spare section, and I assume from these kinds of recommendations that the parks and reserves are looking at them. So all across Auckland there's plenty of sites that have, and particularly subdivisions of the 60s and 70s where there's just a spare section. When they say there's no open space benefit or no direct use as such, are they referring to like active use via a playground type setup? Is that what they mean by that?
Through the Chair, I believe what they're referring to is the criteria that was approved by this governing body in the open space acquisition policy, which is that for a neighbourhood pocket park to be acquired or continue to be held by council, it would be a minimum size of 1,000 square metres. So they're using the criteria that was approved by the governing body.
Okay, all right. And just the one final question is, obviously in instances such as this, and if conceivably other ones come up, you have neighbours and local residents who used to open space perhaps for 20 or 30 years. Now with the unitary plan, you know, they might have one dwelling, they might have 3 or 4 dwellings. And it's probably maybe not your brief, Letitia, but has in any of the conversations, has there been any comment made as to how that might be handled with respect of the neighbours? Because obviously this is going to come as a shock, an open space that may have got used in some form or another, and suddenly it's gone, and it's been vested as a reserve, and clearly there's no legal requirement then in terms of the councils having received from developers, though developers might also have a view on land that's vested in reserve then being sold. What is our approach with respect of the residents? I know there's consultation, but with other groups, I'm assuming there's not with them.
Through the Chair, what we're seeking from the Finance and Performance Committee today is approval to commence the reserve revocation process for the 2 sites which are reserves. That will include public consultation with all the adjoining landowners and public notification in the New Zealand Herald. If there's any objections raised, it would then go to a hearing. It would go back to the hearings committee here. There would then be an independent commissioner sought. The objections would be heard. If there were any issues, it would continue to be brought back to the relevant governing body committee.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
And I think Councillor Hulse would be hearing what you're saying about purchasing and maintaining parks and using the money. So, noted. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Look, I'm happy to second if your intention is to move it.
Yes.
And thank you. I'll put the second there. Look, I just want to acknowledge the local board willingness here. I think it's remarkable. We've had some big shifts in this area as local boards and ourselves have come to understand the importance of putting these non-strategic assets to market. And probably my question, I've got a couple of questions in regard to Panuku's position when it goes to market and entertains sale agreements. Is there any scope to ensure that particularly the vacant sites are actually developed rather than land banked by the end purchaser? What do we discuss that with the market when we go to it, or do we just put it to market and look to achieve best price as opposed to a development outcome?
Through the Chair, it depends on the size and nature of the site. So particularly for the sites that we consider development sites, which our development team are working on, we definitely seek certain outcomes. We have terms and conditions which are written into agreements. We when we seek tenders, it's not just based on what the sale price is, but on what will be delivered. For some of the smaller sites, we have less control over it, and we do have that tension between how much time and money we actually want to invest in ensuring a certain outcome for something that may deliver, say, 500,000, 600,000 to council, versus for the larger development sites where we know we can get an optimal outcome for council and the community.
Thank you. And just for Ms Tyndall, and you, Chair, the timing of the report on the possible reinvestment of revenues from disposals in the unlock categories, what is the timing of that work? That's on the work program for the next meeting, is it?
I think the next meeting, or it might be the meeting after, they're coming back about Avondale. Whether it's coordinating at the same time, I'm not quite sure. We'd have to come back to you on that. So I know that we're going to try and get Avondale up first, and then either at the same meeting or the next meeting be bringing up the issue of optimising the unlock.
I thought we were going to do it on a region-wide basis and avoid doing it on an ad hoc basis.
Yeah, no, the intention is to do both. It's just Avondale's coming up next. And sorry, Sue can...
Sorry, Chair, my understanding is the same as the Chair's, that it will be done on a regional basis, but needs to be coordinated. That's a question that I think we should take up with Panuku and report back in terms of to confirm that they are going to be able to meet that timing.
Thank you. Briefly, and I'll close off, there's a lot of anticipation with local boards to finish that work off and land at a point in an agreement around this table on the possibility of ring fencing the disposal monies in the unlock categories as they are in the transform. So look out for that work.
Councillor Darby, it's probable that our final sign-off on that will be an LTP issue, because that does cause a considerable rejig of budgets. So it'll come to us, but whether we finalise it at that meeting or whether that just becomes something to inform the LTP is more likely.
Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
My question has been asked, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to add my congratulations to the local boards and you as a team for putting this together. It's just a small question on recommendation D. It says that the final terms and conditions be approved under the appropriate delegations. What are they?
Through the Chair, the delegations to the Panuku board to negotiate the final, or to agree the final terms and conditions.
Oh, put it to the board, right.
Member Kake.
Kia ora, everyone. So it is the position of the Independent Māori Statutory Board to support the disposal of the properties, but and that Panuku explores the potential for iwi housing agencies to pursue the commercial interests. The question is to seek clarification on whether and how Panuku could potentially use its commercial advisory fund to assist iwi housing agencies to explore their commercial interests in the property. Well, is there any intent? And the other point is thank you for your comments around the Mātāwaka engagement. I think it could be beneficial much wider than just this topic.
Through the Chair, I would have to take some advice on how we use that fund from either Alan Young, Director of Development, David Rankin, who's our Chief Operating Officer, or Roger McDonald, our Chief Executive, and respond at a future date to you.
Could that be responded directly to the Independent, to Brandy? Thank you.
Yep.
Through the Chair, could you just repeat the question so I ensure that
I'll give it to you, eh? Yep.
Fantastic, thank you.
All right, well, any further comment by councillors? Right, all sweetness and light. Well, we've got a mover and we have a second. I'll put them all as a block. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Never has it been so easy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillors.
Don't tempt fate, Mr. Chairman.
How many in the disposals report? How many is
Don't tempt fate, Ross. Don't tempt fate.
Right, Dr. Levy, Mr. Warburton, Mr. Lambert, and Richard. I saw Richard here as well. And Mark. Welcome. Oh, Mark Lambert, sorry, it was Mark Lambert. Yep. Yeah, and Matthew is, oh, yeah, and Matthew's available for questions. David Lester. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, councillors, thank you very much for your time. So we have public transport as a priority for our transport system in Auckland. Rapid transit is a critical part of that priority, and rail is a critical part of rapid transit. As it turns out, the electrification and EMU process has been much more successful than originally anticipated. It is likely that we will hit the 20 million trips probably next month. 20.8 million trips was the forecast for 2023. It is likely that we will achieve that 5.5 years in advance. And the speed at which the growth continues has been something that we've been monitoring, and since late last year we've been working on the case as to whether there are further EMUs required to ensure capacity is met. And as we've been working through this, we've also been working through the potential for independent powered EMUs, and that would create a value-added opportunity for the leg from Papakura to Pukekohe. So as it turns out, we've presented this case. We realise that there's issues about timing. The sensitivity analysis, as we continue to develop it, keeps changing. Also, as we will talk about this morning, the costs and benefit cost ratio that appears in your case has altered as negotiations have continued, and the cost is now down from 207 million to 198, and the BCR is increased as well, which Mark and David will talk about more. So we're looking for support for this case. We realise that we have to balance our plan in order for this to be able to be secured, and we are very willing to do that, and that is of course a requirement of your case and one of its recommendations. Mr. Chair, if I could just ask David and Mark to just add some more detail, and then we'd be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and councillors. Very quickly, I think if I can just add the reasons for the timing, that we believe that we will run out of trains by 2019. We've done everything operationally we can to increase capacity by reducing headways, and we've already achieved savings in that area. We will just need to get more trains to achieve that. In addition, you'll be aware of the developments down south through the HIF fund, which also is looking at targeting outturn by 2019. This timing will allow that to be addressed as well. In addition, the independently powered or battery-based EMUs will provide a lot of flexibility, not just to get to Pukekohe. They will provide resilience on the network if there are any power outages. They will allow us to work through power outages, which is quite a critical one with the CRL construction. The Mount Eden area will be out of power while the construction's going on, so the battery trains can effectively go through the power out section and keep operating. And ultimately they will be able to service south of Pukekohe if that's electrified. So even if the decision was made today to electrify, we would still need to buy the extra trains for capacity and service, and we will be able to service Pukekohe approximately 5 years earlier than we would if the decision was made today with consents to do the delivery of electrification. So from a timing point of view, a flexibility point of view, and an operational point of view, this is actually quite critical. Perhaps I should just finish by saying we've been working on this for over 2 years. So while the technology in one sense is new, in another sense it's not. If we'd been implementing it 2 years ago, we would have been very much on the edge of the curve. There are now trains being trialled and tested, and as we've indicated in the business case, we actually have warranties in excess of 10 years for the batteries. So we've actually got a pretty secure system, and the costs are coming down all the time because of the technology developments. Happy to take questions unless Mark wants to add anything more.
The only thing I'd add, Mr Chairman, is just in terms of output that we will see from 2019-20 on the rail network, this will allow us to maximise throughput through Britomart prior to CRL in the peak and the shoulder peak. That's a 2-hour period, particularly in the morning, and we'll be able to operate all trains at 6 cars, whereas at the moment we can only operate 3 cars. And obviously, as David says, the battery capability allows us to run through services from Pukekohe to Britomart. Thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Look, before, gentlemen, we go into the debates of the train, I just want to ask you some questions around the process. Why is this the first time that this committee has learnt that you need to buy new trains urgently? Why, in your presentation to us last May, or this May I should say, days before the Auckland Transport Board approved a business case, that this wasn't even highlighted in your report to councillors? I've got it here. You talk about what you want to do for the annual plan, and you talk about what's gearing up for the next LTP, and it's not even there at all. Even though you mentioned, and you've mentioned again today, that you have some really successful, and I don't want to underestimate the success of the rail patronage, 20 million happening even faster than you suggested even in May. But I want to know why 3 weeks after we approved an extra $175 million for you in 17-18, we went up from 587 to 766 million. You now want an extra minimum of 10 million, potentially 25 this year. I also want to know why that you think that this is okay and we're perilously close to our debt to revenue ratios, as you have referenced in the report, that you don't suggest we take 10 million from something else necessarily, or do you, or 25 million, to the money that we've already given you. And finally, how do you think this report shows a positive attitude and your willingness to abide by our agreed statements of intent and letters of expectation and the no surprises working together? Because, gentlemen, this isn't a surprise. It's a huge shock. It's a lot of money and it's a big investment. And I don't think you've handled the process very well. So I'm interested in those answers, please.
Okay, so thank you. I'll ask David to talk in this in more detail. So this is unfortunate. It was, in fact, a surprise in a sense to me as well, because when this came as a case to the Auckland Transport Board, part of the recommendations were that they were in discussions with the council and with NZTA about the need and the funding requirements. So David will talk more, and Mark, in the detail of how this came up against the shoulder of the RLTP and what the options are. Of course there are options, but the best option for us and the city would be to be able to bring it forward. But I'll ask David and Mark to talk more about the actual detail.
Fair points, but I think there's a few other mitigating ones that we need to talk about. I have talked about the battery EMUs around this table on a number of occasions. You're absolutely right, we didn't raise it in May. We were, to be honest, I have always thought that the council was aware that we were working on this. The councillors were cognizant of it. We were working through the detail at the time, so we did not have a position that we could physically nail on both the business case, the NZTA indicative approvals, and the timing of it. So we didn't put it into the May report. We are aware, as we've said, that if this is approved, it is an accelerated requirement, and we would need to make some changes to the cash allocations for the capital program in the 17-18 year. And we've had discussions with the supplier to actually minimise what the requirements would be from a cash flow point of view. All that will happen here is that council can either delay it and put it into the RLTP, in which case you won't have trains till 2020-21, or approve it now and we get it in 19. So it's simply a case of bringing it to the table to say it's possible to schedule it, it's possible to deliver it early, it's possible to meet the HIF requirements based on the information we now have at hand, and we're putting it up to council for consideration, recognising that some changes would be made. It is a moving feast and it is changing, and we're putting it on the table. If council don't want to do it, then it'll just be put back into the RLTP process.
I'll have one supplementary if I may, Mr Chairman, and can I ask that you don't ever surprise us again, that you just, this is a financial, financial performance. I mean, you have to treat this council with a little bit more respect for keeping us absolutely abreast of such huge financial implications. Thank you.
Yeah, and point taken, I did discuss with management that a simple way of resolving this would have been to have a placeholder, because whether it was then approved or not, council could have taken this into context in its financial planning. So that is an apology, but there was a bit of a disconnect because actually our board had understood that there was awareness of this, but we take responsibility, we apologise, and we will ensure also closer oversight of this from a board perspective so that we don't have any assumptions. So I apologise.
Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Before I take my question, I just want to acknowledge David Warburton for the work that he has undertaken to try and grapple with the challenge of getting electrification to Pukekohe. Pukekohe is one of the major growth areas that we're trying to service, and it was a mistake, in my opinion, that electrification wasn't taken to Pukekohe from day one. The question I have that I want to put specifically to David is around the relationship with CAF, how that's going, and secondly, why there were not more units, EMUs, ordered initially, going back 2013 or whenever.
So the first part of your question is the relationship is very strong. I think we've been exceedingly fortunate with CAF's willingness to cooperate. They have actually participated in the design of these battery EMUs, and we've gone with Lloyd Major, one of our design engineers, have worked with them on this program. If you go back 2 years, we were going to be losing over 20% of capacity within the middle car. We've now redesigned all that, so it's virtually none. So we've done a lot of work with them to optimise the whole program. So we're very fortunate to have that, and they've been very open and transparent, and the pricing that they have put through here is particularly good. And the Lester made a comment about the prices coming down. Every time they get a better price, they pass it on to us, which is indicative of the nature of the relationship. In terms of your second question, the 57 3-car EMUs was based on the historic patronage and the projection of a requirement through till 2023-24, when CRL was projected to be built at the time that the orders were placed in 2011. So that was seen to be a prudent number to purchase, and it was decided no one ever projected that we would be growing at 20% compounding per annum in the early stages. So it's a trite comment, but we're almost victims of our own success.
Mr Chairman, my second question is, how many times have you presented to this council and to the former council, Len Brown Council, on the need for an increase in EMUs if we are to progress as is required under the SOI?
Oh, I think I couldn't give you an exact number, Councillor.
I can recall 5 times, but I just wanted to know
occasions
specifically.
that we've done it, and I think, to be fair, the point that Councillor Simpson's raised is valid, but as a consequence, I actually assumed that councillors were conversant with it, and we should have been more explicit as we got to finalising the capital requirements and the timing.
So if you can just then take me through, if we are able to get progress today, what will the implications be for the south with these units? Could you give a little bit more detail on what the outcome is likely to be?
If the decision's made as proposed, and we get equivalent confirmation from NZTA, which we believe is likely based on council's share of the 100 million, then we would be able to place the order in September with the August NZTA board meeting, and CAF have confirmed that they will have trains operating here by 2019.
Mr Chairman, I'm happy to move these recommendations as appropriate.
Mr Chairman, may I just add to that very quickly this point? The other thing that we just also need to be transparent about is that the sensitivity analysis, and Mark may wish to speak to this, is very complex and it's just been changing all of the time, and there is no ultimate guarantee that if this uptake continues, that in due course there won't be a greater further requirement for EMUs. We have tried to accommodate, and I think it's just worth Mark talking about this, we've tried to accommodate this completely as possible in this request. But, you know, it's pretty obvious, you know, that 20% of 10 million trips is 2 million, but when it becomes 20% of 20 million trips, it's 4 million, and just the numbers actually grow pretty quickly. I think the second thing, if I just might, because I think we do need to clear the air on this, there's absolutely respect, Councillor Desley, Councillor Simpson, there's absolute respect for the Council, the Mayor, and everything you stand for, and we would do nothing to breach that. So we are very sorry about this, and we will make sure that it doesn't happen again. We take your point completely. So I think it would be worth, Mark, just talking about the sensitivity analysis, quite important.
Sure, through you, Mr Chairman. So the original EMU purchase was based on a 3% growth per annum from 2016, which allowed for an initial increase following EMU introduction. What this business case assumes is a 10% growth this year as per the SOI, not 3%, and then an ongoing through to the opening of the CRL in 2023 of 8%. Now, if growth actually increases beyond that, prior to the CRL opening, we will have to look at alternative service patterns because, as I mentioned earlier, we are maximising in the 2-hour peak and shoulder peak in the morning, throughput through Britomart prior to CRL. We have an option built into the order with CAF, potentially, which allows us to, at some point in the future, assuming approvals and funding come through, to purchase another 8 if we breached the 10% or 8% growth, and we were able to actually spread the capacity across alternative services which didn't go into Britomart prior to CRL.
Finally, can you confirm that our CEO, Mr Town, has been aware of this requirement for as long as the last 2 years?
Yeah, I've talked to Stephen about it.
Thank you.
Right, we have quite a batting order, just so I'll read them out so you don't feel forgotten. There's Councillor Hills, Newman, Mayor Goff, Cashmore, Casey, Wayne Walker, Councillor Darby and Councillor Mikely. So, Councillor Hills.
Cool, thank you, Chair. This is great, although I'm seeing 17 3-car units, but we were talking about 6-car. Are we talking about attaching other cars, or do we need to be ordering more than 17 3-car units, or is, just...
Yeah, through you, Mr Chairman. We're ordering 17 3-cars, which allows us to couple up to the existing residual 3 cars in the 2-hour morning peak.
Thank you. Perfect.
Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I will speak to this later, but being a councillor from Papakura, it might give you an indication as to how I see this issue. My questions relate to the technology itself, and I... Okay, so the paper goes with the CAF option, which is set out in the report, paras 21 to 23. What I'm looking for is more information about the deployment of this battery technology for commercial operations with passenger cars and other jurisdictions. Can you elaborate if there has been a deployment of this technology elsewhere? Where is it? How long has it been operating? And what was the impact of that?
It's been operating in a number of different jurisdictions, and they're continuing to operate. There are units operating in China now. There are units operating in Europe. I'm pretty sure there's one operating in Japan as well. And in terms of the battery technology, we've been working with China, Korea and Europe in terms of the technology. Everything that we are doing has to comply with international standards for tunnel operation, because we have to make it future-proofed for CRL. So we can't get just any battery, we have to actually have them certifiable. So they are proven, which is why this spec is based on a warranty of 10 plus years.
Have there been any safety issues identified with this technology elsewhere?
No.
Okay.
And the whole units are thermally controlled as part of their operation, and part of the design actually is cooling systems for the whole battery network.
Okay, I'll reserve the right to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I've got three questions, but I just want to preface those by saying this is great news for public transport and great news for relieving some of the congestion problems that will otherwise be increasing in the south. We would like, as Councillor Simpson said, to have had it within our annual plan framework, and thank you, Lester Levy, for your assurances on that. My first question is, I think Lester mentioned that you'd knocked the cost back from the 207 million that we've provided for to 198 million. Now, that part of it was news to me. How have you done that, and what's the certainty of it? Because we're voting we're voting for the figure of 207 million today.
So that changed over the weekend, Mr. Chairman.
That is very recent.
Which is the whole point about the relationship with CAF, as we refine design and we get updates on the pricing. And what we've gone for on the 207 is in fact a sure number. I suspect within the next 6 to 9 months, as we refine the final design feeding into construction, there may well be even more changes in terms of the pricing, particularly around the battery technology, which is, to be blunt, changing on a weekly and monthly basis, and we are at the leading edge of that.
So that drop of 9 million is the offer that CAF has made?
Correct.
Premised on their costs dropping or their wanting to be more competitive?
Correct.
Yeah. The second question is in relation to the alternative option B in section 16. There's a huge difference between CAF batteries at 200, and with Korean batteries, we'd drop the price by $33 million. I mean, that's enormous, because we're not talking about the units, we're talking just about the batteries, aren't we? Can you give councillors an explanation as to why there would be that big a gap between the CAF battery and the Korean battery, and whether you think the Korean option is comparing oranges with oranges?
So the short answer is that at the time of putting this together, as of today as well, the Korean batteries are not warranted. They don't comply with all the international standards, and we couldn't put anything together on the basis of that is a justifiable cost that would provide the health and safety and security requirements for the operation of the network. If in the next 6 to 12 months the Koreans can actually achieve the compliance with the international standards and can provide a warranty in excess of 10 years, then we have an agreement with CAF that we will sit down and work with them in terms of the battery supplier. So it's a third-party supplier. CAF are working with somebody who is already accredited, and in Councillor Newman's comments, batteries that are currently working in a number of situations. We would need to get the confidence to do that. 30 million is a lot of money. It'd be nice to save it, but it would be foolish if we ended up with a ball of fire on the track to save 30 million.
Yep, that's a fairly clear message. The third question, we bring forward effectively electrification to Pukekohe by 5 years, so it's absolutely worth doing. Actually, more than 5 years. No, it'll be 6 years, I think, from 2025 to 2019. At the point that we've electrified the southern line, will these battery-powered units be available for the Kumu-Huapai line, which probably can't be electrified in the foreseeable future? And are there, I mean, I know you have to make some changes because of the tunnel configuration, but is there any reason why these units wouldn't be able to be available to provide an electrified service to Kumeu Huapai, which would have grown considerably by the time that they would be available for transfer?
So we are working with CAF to ensure a structural design that will go through the tunnel. That is the first challenge. Because of the height of the tunnel, we actually have to limit the height of the units, and with the battery cars we've got to do some modifications on that. So we have decided that we will feed that into the design, and that's currently being done as a variation in terms of the detail that we're working through. That would physically allow us to get through to Kumeu and Huapai. The issue, as you mentioned, is the safety issue through the tunnel because they're so narrow. Exit would need to be through the front or rear of the carriages because of the tunnel not wide enough to be able to exit out of the side doors, and we would have to design in a safety mechanism for being able to get out through basically the front window or the rear window. That's doable, and we would need to do that if we were going to run through to Kumeu and Huapai on an EMU.
So the short answer is you can make the modifications, and subject to a business case, it could well be that we could provide an electrified service to Kumeu and Huapai.
Yes, but of course Pocono and Mercer would require nothing. But it would be an extension on the other way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So supplementary to that, so if we can make it work for potential use beyond Swanson, then this actually strengthens this business case.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And just for the Mayor, in relation to his first question, Resolution A approves in principle the procurement, so we're actually only committing to B at this stage. So to give you the assurance on making the savings, and if we can.
Yeah.
Councillor Cashmore.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. So Mark pretty much answered my question, but are we going to need a third tranche of units at some point in time, and how many units, and what sort of year we're looking at? So that's pretty well answered. My other question is relating exactly what the Mayor just put up. It's about the North Waikato. And has there been any discussions with their regional council or North Waikato District Council about units running to there and cost sharing and so forth going forward into the future?
There has been some early discussions, Councillor Cashmore, through the Chair. There have been no detail in terms of dollars changing hands, and that would need to be a three-way discussion with NZT as well because of the subsidy program.
But the principle of user pay should apply.
There has also been discussion by the Waikato entities about electrifying beyond Pukekohe. It's a bigger discussion with the Crown. And I think the additional EMUs that Mark talked about will be required post-CRL because that actually opens up the capacity of the track.
Councillor Casey.
Yeah, I've got three questions. My first one is, what aren't you doing to get the 50 million?
Balancing the capital project, what aren't we doing? Balancing the capital project.
I don't know. It's a bit like what don't you know? What do you mean?
Where are you getting the 50 million from?
Sorry.
What aren't you doing? Because we'd quite like it saying that.
Oh, we can sit down. I mean, we would just take 10 million out of the program. To be honest, if we're spending 720 million and we take 10 million out of it to move it one way or the other, we're talking about a few percent of the overall shift. I haven't got the exact project right now that would change.
So you haven't looked into the 50 million already?
Pardon?
You haven't looked into it already?
No, because we don't. The program doesn't go to the dollar over 725 million because you don't know what the timing is going to be on consenting and property purchases. So it's a refined program that we work our way through. As you know, every year we come in within 95 to 98% of our capital program because we manage the program to meet the expenditure around the envelope that council's agreed.
So what would be the process for negotiating that 50 million with the elected members around this table?
It would come through to the board in terms of a project requirement if it was a change. And it could be, I mean, any one program would only have to be a few weeks late, to be honest, councillor, that would accommodate 10 million. A wet summer or winter will move the capital program by 10 million just because of construction delays.
So I think effectively the program is always managed around timing. So this could be accommodated around timing. It doesn't mean a project gets extracted out of the process. So there's always this flexibility around timing, some of which is proactive and some of which, as David says, with weather and consenting is reactive. So the program is always being managed to deliver as much as possible. Yep.
Thanks for the answer. My second question relates to you mentioned just in passing that the battery trains would operate through Mount Eden when there's no passage. Can you just tell me a bit more about that in terms of the time that you expect that would need to happen?
The timing of it will be when the CRL...
No. How long would we need to have the battery trains running?
I suspect the contract will be running for a couple of years through the Mount Eden construction period.
2 years?
But I can't tell you exactly without looking at the CRL construction program.
So that leads on nicely to my last question. If we don't do this, what happens at Mount Eden?
There'll be shuttle services, or the contract will be managed differently because there will be sections of track operating on power on, and then there will be time off when they can actually work on the line. They can't work on the line with the overhead power activated because it's the live area with 25 kV above them.
Which leads into my final question, which is, if you get a no today, what's your risk management around that?
Well, nothing, because CRL won't be opening up Mount Eden in 2019. So
not in relation to Mount Eden, I mean generally.
Well, everything will be delayed. You will end up, we will place an order in 2018, assuming it goes through the RLTP program. Everything will be a year later, and we will manage people the best we can. If they get left on the station, they get left on the station. We won't be able to pick them up.
I think the critical underlying issue, and this is the reason for the urgency, is that we have got very serious momentum around rail, and we can't afford to lose that momentum, because you just get to the point where the standing room only, you have to reconfigure seating to allow more people to be shoved into the trains, that people who are making mindful decisions about making a modal shift will lose interest. And we believe we can't afford that, because when you have a look at this growth, it's pretty phenomenal, even when you compare it to other jurisdictions. And we want to keep that up, because we have a limited rail network, and we want to extract the greatest value for money out of that network. So we just believe that losing momentum will be a very negative issue, one that will not easily or potentially not able to be recovered. So that's an underlying issue. It's all about capacity. And we have put a lot of effort into improving the service, improving the predictability, the reliability, and we just don't want to lose any momentum. And I think it would be a very negative thing if we did. So that's the issue. Otherwise, there are no other mitigations for that.
The only other option I might add to the Chairman's comment, or my Chairman's comment, is that we would have to start looking, if it was delayed too long, with refurbishment of the diesel locos and Papakura Pukekohe operation, because we would be waiting 5 to 6 years before electrification, so we'd actually have to invest in the upgrade of the diesel stock to actually maintain that service.
Just if I may, just a supplementary based on the response, why have you flatlined at 8% then from 2019 out? Because what the words are saying to me is that it's going to keep going up, but what your patronage figures in this report are is that it flattens off.
Yeah. Mark?
Well, if we, it's a damned if you do and damned if you don't, to be bluntly honest. If we kept projections in at 15+%, I suspect we'd be asked questions about why are you projecting that growth rates will continue at that unprecedented level ad infinitum. So all we're saying is trying to be conservative and saying we've had a burst, it may flatten off, let's take a reasonable position. It's still on global trends a very high growth rate.
But also we are optimising the network, as Mark was talking about. So, when that gets all exhausted, as it will, then you lose that option. So, yeah, look, it's... I think we just have to wait and see how it unfolds. We think at the moment that this is a reasonable request that we have got a good basis of evidence for. But that's why I said there's no guarantee as how the growth will unfold.
Councillor Walker, Wayne Walker.
Yeah, just got a few questions. First off, it is mentioned in the business case around having a charging facility at Pukekohe. There's a $2 million cost attached to that. Is that costed into the proposition here or not?
We don't need it now with the new battery technology. We can go to Pukekohe and back without charging.
And just around the batteries, I mean, the lithium-ion batteries, have we had Tesla in the mix around battery supply, for example? A pretty big plant.
I don't think Tesla per se have been talked to, but we are dealing with global battery manufacturers. The duty cycles on trains are actually much harder than they are on a car because of the size and scale. And we're talking an industrial application that's going almost 24/7. So it's a different spec of battery.
And just the other question, just particularly around the batteries, do we have some flexibility in our contract to make adjustments around price and the like? Because I would anticipate that the batteries will probably be one of the last things to be manufactured. I mean, you'd probably put that off as late as you can, and it may well be that the price goes down. The technology will probably be significantly enhanced within a couple of years. So we've got flexibility around that.
Well, that's why we actually put the Korean option in there, so you could see the range we were dealing with. And of course, we wouldn't have done that if we didn't have the flexibility to be able to do it.
And just around that option...
Councillor Walker, can you speak into the speaker?
Just around that option, I mean, do we have the ability to modify that option if there's another supplier or a change in technology that comes on stream in the interim? We're looking a couple of years out.
I think we need to be careful that we don't end up having a contract that's so flexible that it kind of looks like a house built with a series of leftovers. In principle, CAF have always taken the view that they will work with us to optimise the supply. We've done that with everything else to date, and changing the batteries will not in isolation make sense unless we look at everything else, because the battery management system, the current flows, the life cycles will all have to be as part of the control system. So the answer is yes, we will have the option to make changes, but it's not like going to the supermarket and replacing one set of batteries for another.
But it is worth saying that CAF is a very sensible commercial supplier, and they will be looking to have a product that has got the best and widest application, and that is part of the flexibility in this, that they're not wedded to their own battery solution. That's why they're prepared to look at the others. So I think that's a very positive aspect of that relationship. They want the best outcome for themselves as well.
And the other question I've got just anticipates better than expected success.
To the microphone, Councillor Walker.
The other question just anticipates a better than expected success. I mean, my experiences, for example, the Northern Busway has dramatically exceeded expectations. Our rail patronage has dramatically exceeded expectations. I mean, we consistently get it wrong, frankly. So do we have some flexibility around increasing the numbers, increasing the value of the contract, particularly against a background where we're actually investing in the technology? What is it you mentioned? You know, there's $25 million that we're sinking into design, for example.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as I said earlier, there is an option for an additional 8 trains if we wanted to choose it, subject to funding and approvals. That would be required potentially if we exceeded the current 8% growth per annum prior to CRL, but we wouldn't be able to get any more capacity into Britomart at that point, prior to CRL.
And the design fee is part of the normal design process on any contract.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Just for clarification at the outset before I ask a few questions, are we looking at that, changing that 207 to 198? Is that the intention now?
No.
It's not? No. Okay, just stays it as it is?
But our intention is to get that down as far as we can.
Why not?
Okay, so it's up, it's not at then, it's up to 207.
That's better.
In
Correct.
principle, yep.
Good on you.
So we can at least change that.
Yeah, up to.
It's up to. Questions, probably some more fundamental questions here. I understand that both MOT, AT and I think Auckland Council are involved with the Metro Rail operating model review. This has been going on for a long time. It does interface with these decisions because this review, I understand, looks at how rail is funded nationally and particularly in Auckland. And then we've got section 125 of ATAP, which it's a clear recommendation, and it says that the funding arrangements would benefit from greater consistency, particularly across strategic networks. And then it goes on to specifically say this includes moving to consistent and integrated decision-making for rail. It really emphasises that. We haven't had that, and here we are making another decision in the absence of two critical bodies of work. And that worries me. Gentlemen, I will be supporting this today, but it worries me that we're dragging the chain, or somebody's dragging the chain on the operating model review. I'd like to know, when is that going to be landed? And is finance, Ms. Tyndall and yourselves, are you working actively now to resolve that recommendation 125, which I've just referred to? For me, they are critical bodies of work. Otherwise, we'll be doing this again and again.
So I'll just, Councillor Darby, just frame that up because it'll be hard for David to do this for himself. But David has been the most active person trying to create a more strategic relationship around this issue. We have put a number of recommendations forward that haven't actually been accepted, and we would like to see this resolved, but probably no one has done more, had more initiative around trying to get this done than David. So this is somewhat a little out of our hands, and David can talk specifically to it. But we are very frustrated with this because it's been years now since David first raised this with our board, which our board did actually support. So, David.
It's probably a topic beyond this, but perhaps through the chair I could say this procurement process will not impinge in either way whatever happens, because we actually physically need the rolling stock to move people. The studies that are being driven by MOT and NZTA at the moment are actually looking at the overall Auckland and national structures and interfaces. Whatever the outcome of that is, we will still have to have rolling stock. We will still have to have an operator. So we are working within that confine to say we will still need this to move people. And I guess we've taken the view that if you're going to wait for those decisions to be made, we've been waiting nearly 5 years now for some of those conversations. So you wouldn't have anybody moving anywhere if we didn't.
Okay, and I understand that, and I'll come back to that when I speak to this. The second question is on the A1, the funding at least 50%. So are you anticipating in the wording that you've provided there of a FAR rate, funding assistance rate, of possibly greater than 50% as you negotiate with the NZTA? And would that take into account the possible deferral of full electrification, which is of possible benefit to NZTA? Would that go into the FAR rate discussion that you were referring to under the Roman 1?
Well, the current FAR from NZTA, as they've advised us, is 51. So this was the round number that we worked on. They may be prepared to change the FAR, and we have opened that conversation with them on a number of other points that I've mentioned around this table before. And I think from a practical point of view, it's always open, but we're working on their standard position that the FAR for Auckland's 50% in round numbers. And there is a policy position that they had from about 2011 that the FAR moved from 60 down to 50 over a 5 or 6 year period, which is where we're at now. So they would nearly have to be reversing that decision, but it's always worth a conversation, which is why we wrote it that way.
Yes. Just speaking briefly to this, Mr. Chair, I will be supporting these motions. It's critical that we provide this budget vote. It was signalled, it has been discussed, and it's been in media, it's been discussed here, but probably not in terms of budget quantum, but it's been signalled through ATAP. Additional units were well signalled through ATAP, and we all signed up to ATAP. So there's no surprise there. The surprise, as Councillor Simpson says, is on the quantum, and that's fair. I guess we're wearing our success here. The success is phenomenal, and I think we should acknowledge the success of Auckland Transport, Mark's team, in attracting phenomenal patronage to rail. That's good. What's not resolved are the ongoing issues, the operating model for rail nationally and particularly as it applies to Auckland, and the section of ATAP I referred to. I've mentioned that to the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor, and I think that needs to be in the ATAP refresh. We need to land that. We need to agree on a consistent funding approach for the strategic networks. We don't have that at the moment. That is so important for Auckland. In some respects, for the balance of the country, that's probably not that important. But we are very different in having a strategic roading network and a strategic public transport network. And at the moment, that public transport network is not equitably funded by our funding partners. It's far from it. And if we get this coming before us again without resolving those bigger overarching issues, Auckland ratepayers are going to continue to be funding the strategic public transport network inequitably. We are going to keep wearing it. Now, I know there's a lot of work being done on ATAP, but there are still sections that I'm seeing require attention, and that operating model for rail, which is in some ways outside of ATAP, but inside, it sort of crosses the boundaries, needs to be addressed. I would like to know the full status in coming months of that operating model review, and when the Ministry of Transport, with the partners to it, intend to land real and binding decisions on the operating model for rail.
And we agree with you.
Thank you. And lastly, I hear Dr. Warburton's reply to Councillor Casey's question, which I thought was a very good question on the reprioritisation of the 50 million. I would be concerned if we saw further erosion of the public transport and active transport budget vote. That would be of concern to me, and I'll look forward to seeing what is reprioritised, but it would be a worry to me if I saw an erosion of that budget for Auckland. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just point of clarification and an answer. You need to be aware that, to our knowledge, there are actually 2 reviews being done with respect to rail. One is a metro rail review, and Mark is part of the team that is involved in that. They're still working on it in terms of reference, so don't hold your breath. There is a second piece of work being done by Treasury. So that first one's been done by MOT. The second one's been done by Treasury, looking at rail in New Zealand, which I believe is more freight and infrastructure orientated. We're not party to that at this stage, but you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out that one won't work without the other, just because of the way the network is. So those 2 pieces are critical. We have a good working relationship with Kiwi Rail, so I think one of the things that has improved over the last 7 years has been that working relationship from an operational point of view and a delivery and functionality point of view, which is why, part of the reason why, our operation performances have gone from the 70% to the high 90%, which is part of the integration. So that's the sort of rail piece. In terms of the allocation of the capital, Can I just say, absolutely, the board has strategic themes, and the first one is the promotion of public transport. So I think the probability of us ever being able to change that allocation wouldn't work very much at all. But I do think people need to just come back to the realisation that we're talking about close to 1% of the actual money here, so we're not talking about major changes in position. We get those variations, as I said before, just with weather or a property purchase or something.
Okay, thank you.
So, don't hold your breath. Councillor Lee, Mike Lee.
Thank you. I have to agree with Councillor Simpson about the timing of this request. Yes, this council has already approved an extra fleet of EMUs, and that was part of its decision to support the original 2.4 billion CRL package, which included an extra fleet of EMUs, a station at Newton, and also a entrance to the Karangahape Road station at Berriford Street. All of those elements have been taken out of the CRL budget and it's gone up over $1 billion. My question is, in terms of this particular fleet of battery trains, and I don't recommend people going on Google and Googling battery trains because you get a whole lot of toy trains, but these are experimental, are they not? Would that be fair to say at this stage? The technology of battery electric trains is still experimental?
No. They're running commercially, they have been running commercially in light rail for a long time, as you know, and they've been involved in heavy rail now, both in the UK and I think Japan, and there's one running in China now. They're relatively new, though. I'm more than happy to acknowledge that.
I think 2015 was the first one. It is new technology, and I would like a little bit more details, I think, about how they work out before voting this sort of money for something that is new, and I would argue experimental. It would be good to get the jurisdictions and actually a report on how these things work, I think. In terms of the procurement, there appears to be no competitive price process. Okay, you've gone to CAF, and I can see some sense in that. But what I can't see is the cost benefits of this battery train with standard EMUs or standard tried and true hybrid electric diesel trains or locos. Why haven't we seen that as to make a cost comparison?
To answer that now, the diesels weren't an option through you, Mr. Chairman, because they would not be compatible in the CRL tunnels, which are designed for only electric, and we didn't want to have a diversified fleet, which would make operation very difficult.
I'm talking about hybrid diesel electric, so presumably the CRL, when I last checked, was electrified, right?
Yes, but I thought the diesel electrics have diesel running to generate the electricity to drive.
No, I'm talking about hybrid. I'm not talking about DEMUs. I'm talking about hybrid diesel electric, not DEMUs, which is a different beast altogether.
We started with that, but then decided that we didn't actually need the additional cost of the diesels because we could recharge using the electric network when they weren't running on battery. So this was a better option and provides a more sustainable long-term future with avoiding the diesel.
But they are, so we haven't seen any figures on how much a standard diesel electric hybrid train have we? We haven't been. We have to make a decision with no alternatives. So I'll make that point. in the report here, and I guess it's based on information that can only come from AT, the additional rolling stock will increase the current peak capacity, which will be reached by 2019. Options to generate additional capacity through improvements to fleet operations are close to being exhausted. Is that really true?
The answer is yes, because the only other way we can provide additional capacity is by reducing the headways, and to change the headways we need to get better integration over the network.
You see, I'm told that the constraints on the network are not the rolling stock, but actually the headways, the slots, and there's a whole lot of things that could be done to improve that capacity and remove or reduce those constraints. There's nothing to do really with rolling stock at all. It's to do with an incredibly slow door opener on the new EMUs. It has a lot to do with the waiting time at Newmarket, which could be, according to Transdev, be alleviated by having a station at Newmarket West, and other aspects like completing the Newmarket Triangle and so on. But you don't think that's true?
You're aware that the Newmarket Triangle is actually part of the CRL construction process. The EMU door opening has been changed as part of a sequencing requirement in conjunction with Transdev and the safety program. And we are working with Siemens to try and reduce the headways, because it will require more balizers on the ETCS system to actually allow us to do that, despite whatever advice you've been given.
There are still things that can be done to improve headway, and they're not exhausted. And then we haven't even discussed the electronic train control system, which certainly has a constraint.
But they don't allow us to get any more into Britomart. That's the limiting factor.
Well, it's not just Britomart, though, is it? And there are ways, of actually servicing significant parts of the network without actually going to Britomart. But we'll leave that aside. I'm also interested in the existing fleet of SASDs, which the latest tranche was rolled out in 2011, so more or less as new, sitting down at Tamaranui, and why couldn't more be done to bring that very significant rolling stock capacity back into service?
For reasons that we have the current problem with the interface now, where they're changing at Papakura, and it doesn't provide a good customer experience.
Well, that brings me to the other point that really concerns me.
Let's wrap it up, Councillor Lee. Come on.
Sorry?
I think it's getting quite technical and quite detailed.
Sorry,
yeah?
I'm sorry.
I
beg your pardon.
Continue on.
Let's move away from technical to political. The electrification to Pukekohe has been a concern since the advent of the Super City in 2010. Now, I thought when I was chairman of the ARC that it took a hell of a long time to get approval from the Labor government and then the national government to electrify the bulk of the Auckland rail network. But actually, it was from 2006 when the business case was presented to 2008 when the Labor government approved it, and then 2009 when Mr Joyce, after stopping everything, approved it again. So that was 3 years. That's half the time it's taken so far to get Pukekohe electrified. And what I'm concerned about is we're buying an extra fleet of very new technology battery trains because essentially no one has pushed hard enough to get Pukekohe electrified. So the cost is going to be carried by the ratepayers largely rather than the Crown, and that is a real concern I have about this emergency decision. Thank you.
I think that kind of, to a degree, reinforces what Councillor Darby is saying about making sure we get the equitable metro rail policy for the country. So thank you, Councillor Lee. We have Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen. I'm supportive of what you put up today, and listening to the questions around the table has probably made me even more so. I just did have a couple of questions, Mr. Chair, that I look for in the report, some figures that are probably appropriate for our committee that aren't reflected in there, and maybe we should get some visibility on at some stage. I'm not saying to hold up this process in any way, but that's just around, obviously we'll end up with a bunch of diesels as this gets rolled out of those units if they come offline. Yeah. So I was just curious, and perhaps picking up a little bit on Councillor Lee's question there, what could happen to those units? Like perhaps capturing that in a report, David, to us, what's going to happen to those. And I'm particularly interested in what offset and value we can get for those. Like, are they scrap? Can they be used for affordable accommodation? No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding there. But, obviously there's the engines, there's the carriages, there's probably the maintenance tooling, all those assets there that we could dispose of. And just probably, I'd be particularly interested to know how much value we can get back that which helps offset the investment we're making today, Mr. Chair.
We'll seek a brief answer today, and there can be further information.
The short answer is we can provide you that information, but the purchase of these units will replace the diesels, which are part of the business case, because they're very expensive to run at the moment, given the status and the cost of the operation to maintain those units through the Kiwi Rail diesel maintenance facilities. So we would standardise with electric. Those units would not be required. We would then be in a position of determining the best way to dispose of those, which is effectively what we've been doing for the last 5 years as we've rolled in the existing electric trains, and the whole network's being gradually disposed of to various places that have expressed interest in them in New Zealand and offshore.
Right, because even understanding even what those book value is versus what we're able to get for it. So if I could, Mr. Chair, just perhaps foreshadow if you'd like to think about just getting that report in the future. You might want the mover and the seconder might want to think about that, or I'm happy to move an amendment just to cover that base that we get the report at some future stage. Could I just, in the final question, Mr. Chair, could I ask, would that report be best to come through Auckland Council, perhaps, or Auckland Transport? Are you happy to provide that? Happy to provide that? Yes. Okay. Yes. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to accommodate that as mover.
Okay, I am a seconder as well. Yep.
Okay, great.
So someone's coming up.
I'll come with some wording. Yep.
Get the appropriate wording, and we need to be quick because we have 2 more speakers. So we have Member Kake.
Speakers or questions?
Oh, questions.
I mean, got to the debate yet.
2 more speakers on questions, and then we've got comments.
Tuatahi nei rā te karamihi ati ki a koutou. Dr. Leslie Levy, gentlemen. The Independent Māori Statutory Board supports the intent and principle around this. I did have a comment or question I'd like an answer to in terms of the Māori impact statement, as it states that there hasn't been any consultation with Māori, and I guess I come back to the statement around your poor planning shouldn't be iwi's emergency, basically. So better configuration around that, and I think that's a theme to all agenda items really. But the statutory board supports this proposal for the following reasons. Obviously, the anticipated or unanticipated supply and demand, particularly from the south. And the Māori aspect to that is, in terms of the current Māori population being 28.1% out in Papakura, 13.2% in Franklin, mate, this is good for Māori. This advances the interests for Māori in these two, in the south of the south, as it relates to accessing the wider Auckland opportunity. So you guys have got a pretty good track record, I think, in terms of the wider Auckland, and time to shine the light on the south of the south. And so, ngā mihi atu ki a koutou. Tēnā.
Thank you. And could I just make a comment about in all the technical and financial discussions we have, we do tend to forget that an imperative of public transport is an equity issue. So people who, for whatever reason, have got no other access to transport, whether it be through disability, age, socioeconomic circumstances and the like, And this is a critical element in the decisions that we're making at Auckland Transport. The issue of equity in transport is a critical issue for us, and that is one of the reasons that public transport is important. It's not only an issue around congestion, it is also a really important issue around equity, and we don't often highlight that in our discussions, but we shouldn't forget that because all of those people who have some sort of disadvantage as it relates to transport have still got a right to have access to good transport services, and that is something we are extremely mindful of.
Kia ora.
Right, I'm allowing two speakers to have supplementary questions, which is Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Mike Lee.
Oh, thank you for indulging me a second tranche of questions here, but it relates to the request by Auckland Council back in 2012 when we were exploring the SOI to look at the electrification of Papakura to Pukekohe. Can you remind me of what the costs were likely to be at that stage, the preliminary costs that were prepared?
My memory of the number is 130 million, and most of that cost is actually related to having to lift all the bridges to put the electrification underneath them. And they obviously require consenting and construction-related issues to actually implement that.
So at that time also there was some discussion around the likely timeline on any such implementation. Can you recall how long that was likely to be?
I think when we were doing the work more recently, we were looking at something like probably 5 to 6 years from the time somebody made the money available to do the consenting requirements, the construction approvals, and then the implementation of the whole program.
And can you confirm that the CEO of Auckland Council has been given access to this information since that time?
Certainly was aware of it at the time, Councillor Fletcher. I'm not sure if Stephen had seen any data in the last 6 or 12 months. We've just done a review just to see how it would stack up from a timing point of view in terms of the business case.
But these were certainly, Councillor Fletcher, discussions that David and I had with the previous mayor and Stephen Town in our regular meetings. So we would still like to see this part of the line electrified, but we're being realistic in terms of managing service momentum.
Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Yeah, in response to the Mayor in regard to extending services to Huapai, which I will remind everyone was official policy with ATA and then AT until April 2013, I think it was. You said that even with these new battery trains, there would be some issue with the Waitakere tunnel. Could you just explain that again?
The tunnels are narrow, and to meet the safety case, it's not adequate for the doors to open for people to come out the side doors because they're so narrow, and it's deemed that they would need to exit out the front or the rear. And to do that, we would just need to modify the front windows so that they had the capacity to open. So in the unlikely event of emergency, you could do that, not dissimilar to how you would have it on a bus or a plane.
Trains, of course, go through that tunnel every day of the week, and including passenger excursion trains on a regular basis with consent from Kiwi Rail. Can I, in terms of another tunnel, the CRL, do you intend to run the battery trains through the CRL?
Yes, they will be able to be run through the tunnel, but they aren't so narrow, and they can be exited through the doors and people taken to safety if there was an emergency.
Okay. These battery trains are quite a bit heavier because all the batteries they have to carry. We know that in terms of engineering the CRL, it's at pretty close to the limit of a gradient that even an electric train can manage. So are you confident, given the extra weight of these battery trains, that they can manage the gradient through the CRL?
Yes, it's part of the design brief.
Thank you.
Right, questions over, and we have Councillor Hills and Councillor Newman wish to comment.
Thank you. Yeah, just quickly, I think this is what we've been asking you to do. So, although I think Councillor Simpson's points were good about the sort of more detail earlier, but this has been, I've seen this in the media a lot of times. I've seen it on your board reports. I think Todd Nile had a big story on it in the middle of last year, and this is what we want you to do. We want you to increase capacity. We want you to be making sure that the services are better. So I congratulate you on this. Yes, there are some issues of what we need to know in what time, but I do not want any more delay on this. I think it's good. When we're talking about the money, I know it's obviously a lot of money, but still when we're talking about things like, when I first got on the local board, $40 million to widen Glenfield Road, recently Albany Highway, Old Albany was $56 million to widen a road. This is another transformational thing for the south of Auckland, where a lot of new residents are going to be, so I think it's crucial. The other thing is I think we should still be pushing as much as we can on the electrification. So just because we have this, I don't think we should suddenly pull back. I know that Andrew Bailey, according to Greater Auckland, has actually said in his election material that he secured electrification to Pukekohe, so that's nice if it's true somewhere. So I think we should keep pushing for that. I think the other thing is we need to be making sure this also is coupled with increasing the capacity during the off-peak times. But I think, with these cars, I don't know how fit out they come, but we need to be thinking about how we reconfigure the seating in some of the cars, because I think we're going to get to a point soon where we can't get any more capacity on the rail, but we might need to do like we're doing with the double-deckers, getting more capacity in the actual carriages themselves. So, yeah, I think this is fantastic. This is needed. Anywhere we can get more people into public transport, we can, and this is a creative idea. Yes, it's costing more money, but it's actually where we should be spending our money. So thank you very much.
And a cheaper option may be to, like in Tokyo, where you've got the guards there who come and just push everyone in. It works quite effectively. Councillor Newman.
Put while you're ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. I've listened to all the questions and the sentiment that's been expressed this morning, but what isn't well known at the moment outside of Papakura is the sheer volume of commuters that are coming from Pukekohe and elsewhere, and they are parking in very congested suburban streets around the Papakura train station. Every weekday you will see those streets very congested with commuters coming from Pukekohe and parking there to access the trains at Papakura, and it's quite unsatisfactory. Auckland Transport is already having challenges delivering the stacked park and ride at Papakura. That park and ride is needed, but it's needed for Papakura commuters. It's not designed for Pukekohe commuters to have that suboptimal customer experience of driving to a completely different town to park there to access trains. That's impractical, and it's certainly not conducive to what I think is a good customer experience. So I do support the acquisition of these units for the purpose of delivering a continuous service without disruption south of Papakura. The other thing, Mr. Chair, that I think is relevant here is that this complements the announcement from Sunday, the $600 million announcement by the Prime Minister for the Crown Infrastructure Partners Fund. That is absolutely relevant here. It was announced in Drury because that's where we're going to see a lot of investment taking place. If we make the decision today, we've got a continuous service south of Papakura. The new station that will need to be built at Drury can be funded in part from that fund, and I think that that is completely consistent with where we need to be going in terms of the partnership with government and the private sector. Member Kake has pointed out, Iwi Rail, Member Kake has pointed out that there are equity issues here. In the south, we have a very high concentration of Māori population. You're right, the distributional benefits of PT need to reflect that we need to ensure an equity of opportunity for movement, and this is aiding that outcome. One thing that I would like AT to come back to us with, and it doesn't need to be resolved in a recommendation, but I would like more information on just the rollout of the battery-powered operation in other jurisdictions, and in particular the safety records around that, because I think that's important to give me assurance and other colleagues assurance about this new technology and its application in outer suburban South Auckland, Mr. Chair. So if I could just ask AT to pick that up and address it at a later date.
Yes, it was an important announcement. We haven't taken the smile off Deputy Mayor Cashmore's face since Sunday.
I never smile.
We have Councillor Sayers and then Mayor Goff to wrap it up.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, thank you for the wording on the recommendation up there, and hopefully Mover and Seconder are happy with that. I want to thank the Mayor and Council Mike Lee for just bringing Huapai into the conversation today. Not all councils may be aware, but there's a lot of assets that the locals see sitting out there, including the tunnel, the railway, the track, the platforms. We have diesel units, we have the carriages. Why can't we run a diesel service through there? And particularly in light of the congestion that's occurring there on State Highway 16. So I thank you, gentlemen, for raising them. We got some answers from you, David, which is very much appreciated. So I would like to suggest to you that I contact you offline and perhaps bring a very small delegation of perhaps interested parties from there, just to understand more what I've heard today, and just have a bit more of a meeting of the minds there, if that would be appropriate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to support this paper. It does provide us with a headache. It provides us with yet another funding challenge, as if we didn't have enough. And it takes us right to the threshold of our debt-to-revenue ratio. But it's an expenditure item that I think is absolutely justified. I want to pick up where Councillor Newman left off, the announcement that the Prime Minister and I made on Sunday. What it effectively means is that we'll be providing $600 million, $400 million in South Auckland, and if I focus on South Auckland, that will create another 17,800 dwellings. 17,800 dwellings. That's multiply that by the number of people per dwelling. And some of those people will work locally. There's an industrial estate that's going in at the same time that will employ up to 5,000 people. But a lot of people will be travelling. And anyone with experience of State Highway 1 in the south of the city knows that it's already at maximum capacity, and the third lane on the motorway will only help temporarily. So if we're going to create huge new housing developments, one of the prerequisites has got to be infrastructure, and the infrastructure that will help most in this case is rail. There are 2 new stations that will be funded under the SPV fund at Drury and Pairata. But what it means is that we can encourage the continuation of the movement from people out of cars and onto train. If we don't have these new units, leave aside the independently powered aspect, we will hit maximum capacity, we won't be able to meet demand, and we will create a reputation for rail and public transport that we can't afford to have. We need to have that transition to public transport. And what it means for the people from Pukekohe, south of Pukekohe, who might commute to travel to Pukekohe to catch the train, is that they won't have the transfer at Papakura. They will have more reliable and more comfortable travel. It will be quicker travel, and from the environmental point of view, we will get rid of the polluting diesels and we'll have clean electric power. So it has everything going for it, and we need to support that. If we make this decision now, then we can actually get the trains delivered, I think, by 2019. And the estate at which we launched the SPV on Sunday, if that goes ahead according to plans, you'll have buildings completed on that by 2019. So you'll have the infrastructure going in at the same time as the housing demand is being created. Won't that be a first for us in Auckland? Usually it's several years later. So I think this is a really positive paper. It's a positive change for Auckland, and I commend it to councillors for your support.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Councillor Darby and then Councillor Cashmore.
So, thank you, Chair. I did speak to the motion, but the red C has been added. I'd actually like to just ask, would this be appropriate, Chair, rather than coming back to your Finance Performance Committee, because there's really not really a lot of financial implication there. We have a bi-monthly update from Auckland Transport at Planning Committee workshops. It's there, and we've got a list of things to do. I don't want to labour Auckland Transport with a full-blown report to this committee when it could be addressed through a presentation at the bi-monthly. I think that would be the more appropriate place, and maybe I could have some feedback from Ms Tyndall or even Auckland Transport. I'd like them to get on and deliver transport rather than be writing reports, but I think there is a vehicle already in place, as I've just outlined.
I have no problem with that. Councillor Fletcher, just to change that to...
Mr Chairman, I think I'm agnostic as to whether it comes to this committee or to the Planning Committee. I think what is going to be important for the future is that there is a report that does highlight some of the issues around the servicing of these units, the costs that will be associated. I think something for the record would be helpful. So where it goes, where it's reported to, I don't mind.
We'd be guided by you on that, Mr Chair, but we're happy to do whatever is required. There's no additional problem for us.
Biggie, Councillor Darby, I mean,
Sorry.
leave this one this time. We'll hear what you're saying, but...
Just attempting not to clutter this.
Understand that.
We talked about lubricating the decision-making process, didn't we?
Well, this,
Is C1 serious?
Tyndall points out to be, it is part of informing the LTP, so...
Okay, leave it.
We leave it for this time, but we hear what you're saying about cluttering the reports.
Financial implications.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Councillor Cashmore?
Just very briefly, so no surprises that I'm going to be in support of this. This is a culmination of 7 years of work. So Councillor Des Morrison started this discussion with Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Lee and Auckland Transport back in the amalgamation days of 2010 in the first period of this council. In those days, it was $136 million for the tracks and 2 stations, and the cost of raising the bridges over 7 access routes was huge. This is a far more finessed outcome. And as the Mayor has said, the growth that's going, not just around Puki, but from Papakura to Puki, is huge. And the issue is going to be 5,000 to 6,000 jobs at the Stevenson's commercial development, but there'll be 3 times that number at other sites around the south. And people travel. The numbers of students that are commuting from the south up to Varsity or to MIT or to AUT is phenomenal. The peak hour traffic at Papakura is huge. And Councillor Newman is absolutely correct, because there needs to be a massive park and ride facility at Papakura to cater for the people in the outlying areas, whether that's Karaka or Clevedon or Drury itself. So the new stations at Drury and at Pairata will be a great boon. We have been a victim here of our own success. The rise in rail patronage is a great thing, and this will help to build that. So with 8% on 20 million, and you add 8 to that, then you compound that figure going up, the numbers get very large very quickly. And 8 might be conservative or not. point is it can be monitored and acted upon in the future. So if we have to do a third tranche of sets, we can at the right and appropriate time. Councillor Darby's point about a closer relationship with the other parties involved in this is very, very true. You take where we were pre-amalgamation or in the first term of this council compared to where we are now with the latest announcement just in the weekend of the special purpose vehicle. We have come a mega mile. And the relationship now is far more collaborative, understanding and trustful, and long may that continue. So this is Auckland growing, folks. And it's an opportunity and a challenge, but the opportunity is something that we need to maximise upon.
Continue to wrap up on a positive note. Councillor Mike Lee and then Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a number of elements to this decision, and it's interesting that Councillor Cashmore used the word finesse, and I'll come back to that. In terms of financial decision making and the council and local government standard financial process, this is very poor decision making, very poor process, as Councillor Simpson has noted. In terms of the strategic approach, it's ad hoc and done in a rush, and deliberately so. In terms of the politics of the situation, I believe that is the cardinal issue here. This is not about new technology and the risks, undoubted risks of using this technology, which is not used in any of our public transport comparator cities in Australia or North America. But leaving that aside, the key element here, the cardinal element, is politics. Doing this, spending this money, making this decision, lets the Minister of Transport off the hook in regard to completing the electrification of the Auckland network. As I noted before, it seemed a very long, difficult battle to persuade Wellington to electrify the Auckland network 60 or 70 years after the Wellington network. But it was only actually 2 years. That's nothing. The Pukekohe extension has taken at least 6 years. And I recall the Minister at the time, Michael Cullen, saying, oh, well, we can come back to us in 2013 and we'll look at the question then. Of course, he was gone by 2013. Doing this really means you can forget about completing the electrification of the Auckland network and all the benefits of that for our political lifetime. I can tell you that now. Instead of taking this decision, we should renew our efforts before the election to pressure the government and all the leading political parties to get this job done, just as Auckland did, united long before the super city to win electrification for Auckland. We don't see that sort of leadership. We see compromise and ad hoc decision making. Members, for that very good reason, I will not be voting for this measure. Why should Auckland have second best? Why can't we have a completed electrified network as originally set out in the original business case? Therefore, I will not be supporting this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be supporting this, and while I am absolutely clear that Councillor Lee is right, that too often we have lent central government off the hook in terms of funding their share, I don't believe that we do justice to the people of the South if we delay a decision on this. We have known that this was coming. We have had briefings. I find it difficult to accept that this should come as a surprise to any councillor, because this was part of the fundamental platform for ATAP, the Auckland Transport Alignment Project. This along with the Mill Road corridor, electrification of the rail to Pukekohe has been what we have been trying to grapple with since 2010. And it's been well highlighted by Councillor Newman here. We've been very fortunate to see patronage, but let me take you back a few years. We've taken, for perhaps those new to this council, are just assuming that public transport was going to get the patronage. I'd like to remind you of the bitter battleground that there was in 2010 to get any funding coming through for public transport. So this is something we should be celebrating today. In my opinion, and from what I know from my time in Auckland Transport, this is the most cost-effective way to achieve this. The relationships that have been built up with CAF, the opportunity that we have, we've got to understand that we're just a small bit player in the whole of the international scheme of investment by other countries into public transport. And the relationship that we have with CAF is something that I think that we should treasure. They've proven to be an excellent partner for us, but we do need, I think, to make the decision today to allow this investment to be made to service the growing requirements within the South, but at the same time, as Councillor Lee has quite correctly said, not let central government off the hook. I find it kind of funny, actually, in a way, after the long battles that some of us might have had with Michael Cullen, that he's now sitting on the board of Auckland Transport. So it must be quite delightful at times to have him seeing the very big challenges that Auckland Council is grappling with. But I'd like to thank again Auckland Transport and the officers and the engineers who have actually done the research to enable us to put this forward as a practical proposal, a safe proposal. And this is an interim measure. Yes, we will have electrification going into the future, but this at least enables the growth that we are seeing in the South to be serviced appropriately. And finally, because the biggest critics of public transport, and some of you will have had people ring and say, well, you'll never get Aucklanders out of their cars. Every time I see the battleground of people trying to park at Papakura, where they've come from Clark's Beach, or whether they've come from Karaka, or whether they've come from Clevedon or Pukekohe, I say to myself, it was the right thing to do. And today, to support this, it is the right thing to do. So I'd like to encourage all of you to support it. And Mr. Chairman, could I ask for a division on this, please?
No problem. But wait, there's more. We have more speakers. So with the last two, this time, it's Councillor Casey and Councillor Sayers.
Mine isn't a speech, it's just a comment. In the interests of transparency and accountability, and the thousands who watch our meetings live through the thousands, it would be really good if we can limit the acronyms, because my list is 15 and I had to ask my mate next to me what 6 of them meant. No, it's no disrespect to these presenters, but we all do it. So in the interest of greater accountability, it'd be really good if you use one to say what it is, or not use them at all.
There was one exchange, but there was a lot of acronyms going on. Anyway, thank you, Councillor Casey, for bringing that point up. Councillor Quacks to conclude.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to take a call on this, but I've decided to be very brief, and just to make a couple of points. This is the second time that we've been caught out by Auckland Transport, providing us with an unwelcome surprise, and that doesn't sit well with me. The other thing that I'm concerned about was is related to the debt headroom that will and what impact that may have in the future. The thing that was, or the issue raised by Councillor Lee, which I find quite disturbing, is I think that this will lessen the incentive to provide electrification to Pukekohe. And what that leads to is, a further question that leads to is, what will happen to this technology in 10, 20 years' time when electrification hasn't occurred to Pukekohe and we're stuck with old technology which we may not be able to get hold of, we may not be able to get rid of. So that is a concern. So those are the three concerns that I have. I will be voting for it, however, with some reluctance, because I understand the need for it, and especially in regards to the announcement that was made on the weekend. As councillors around this room will know, that I've been pushing for many years now for the kind of infrastructure funding that was announced on the weekend, and I understand that the growth that will happen in the south now will be quite significant, and so the need for further transport infrastructure to the south is critical. I just hope that the concerns around the debt headroom and the technology and the incentive for, or the decreasing incentive for electrification to Pukekohe does not come to pass. So I will support this, but support it, Mr. Chairman, with some reluctance.
Thank you. Just on the issue of debt headroom, we're quite comfortable. We are keeping fairly well within the required parameters. So just to be clarified on that. Councillor Philippine.
Look, sorry, I also wasn't going to speak, and that's why I've shut my mouth most of this particular agenda item. But when I hear words, unpleasant surprise, it does surprise me, and I'm speaking. I will be supporting this particular recommendation because it hasn't been a surprise. That's the interesting thing, and it hasn't been. And for those councillors that are into this, their first term in this triennial election, can I suggest that if there are any issues that you get the history to those before you end up coming here. So, you know, when I hear that just sort of slams Auckland Transport, and it's not. Now, Councillor Hills mentioned the Todd Nile report, and you're right, it's been in the paper, it's been all over the place, it's been at Auckland Council, not only in the last term, this term, but also in 2010, as Councillor Cashmore indicated, and for those that are around this table, it hasn't come as a surprise. This is needed, it's required, I'm speaking. This is needed, it's required, and on the weekend it shows that this is definitely something that needs to go through. Chair, I know there's been a division called. I, like Councillor Darby, don't like C, and again for the reasons that he's outlined. I mean, I agree with Councillor Sayers in regards to the actual report and what you want done. But I think as a result that Auckland Transport reports to the Planning Committee, I just believe in this particular case, and let's leave it there. You know, we can still ask the questions. It's going to be an open agenda. So, you know, let's ask the questions. So I don't know how we're going to manage voting against C as I would, and, you know, I'll leave it to the other councillors or independent Māori statutory board members to do what they need to do. But, Chair, it is required. It has been canvassed with us over many, many years, and I just look forward to this happening, and also look forward to the report. But I believe that the Planning Committee is when that report in relation to C should be. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Philippine. Anyway, I mean, we do need to remember with budgets, I mean, reprioritising occurs all the time. We've got to be flexible. We've got to be agile. I mean, we only need to think about light rail or rail, whatever, to the airport. I mean, it's just way more urgent than it was 3 years ago, and we kind of didn't see some of those things coming, so there is that sort of flexibility. I'm going to take A and B first, I'm going to take C separately, and so by division, A and B.
Ready?
Councillor Clow.
Yes.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Councillor Cashmore.
Yes.
Councillor Collins.
4.
Councillor Darby.
4.
Councillor Filipaina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Mayor Goff.
In favour.
Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you.
Member Honeck.
Oka, aye.
Councillor Hulse.
Aye.
Councillor Lee.
No.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Quacks.
Yes.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson.
For.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
Member Kake.
Tautoko. Misgivings.
Yes. Councillor Sir John Walker.
For.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Right, covered fairly convincingly, so we'll take C by division as well. So that is passed 20 to 1.
No, we don't need. Did we need a division on this?
Councillor Clow.
Yes, we're taking C separately. There was a request that, because it would have caused some difficulty for some people who didn't want to vote for it, so.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Councillor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Darby.
Against.
Councillor Filipaina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Mayor Goff.
No.
Councillor Hills.
Yes, I don't think it matters.
Member Honeck.
Oh, no.
Councillor Hulse.
Aye.
Councillor Lee.
Yes.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Quacks.
Yes.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson.
To be honest, I don't mind, but for.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Member Kake.
Carl.
Councillor Sir John Walker.
For.
Councillor
Yes.
Wayne Walker. Yes. Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Well, good. Right. Well, that's carried by, there we go, 15-6. Thank you very much, Dr. Levy. Thank you, Dr. Warburton. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much,
58.
councillors.
Thank you very much.
It's not 15-8.
So we're now going to have a 5-minute break, and then we are going to be dealing with the Auckland Film Studios. 5-minute break. Actually, we're coming back at 1:45, which gives you 6 minutes.
Sorry, son. I didn't have. Says it, yeah, there, look. Doesn't actually say.
Okay, councillors, if we could keep the noise down at the back, please. John, welcome.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors, for your time today. This is should be a reasonably short item on your agenda. You've got the paper. The paper's reasonably straightforward, and self-explanatory, I would have thought, and the resolutions are to the same effect. So what I propose to do is actually take questions, but before I do that, I'd just like to make a couple of comments. This paper today is actually a finance paper rather than a discussion around the wider issue of the Auckland film industry and the film sector. But I should also like to make the observation that should you give effect to the recommendations that we're proposing here in the paper, that the council's footprint, its involvement and its support, and in fact its service delivery to the film sector won't change in any way from what it currently is. This is merely an internal reorganisation that we're proposing. The other point I'd just like to make, there's a number of parties that have been mentioned in this paper, whether it's ACIL, AFSL, ATEED, etc. All those parties have been intimately involved in the discussions that have got us up to this point. So everyone's on the same page, I think is probably the expression I'd use, and the proposal we've got in front of you gives effect to a number of the aspirations that the various parties are looking to pursue. So I'll leave it at that. I don't have anything more to add. It's to the point, and I'll happily take questions.
John, Councillor Holst and myself, being from the West and having a long history with the studio, are we transferring a unit that's in suitable state to continue on to service and deliver what it needs to deliver, or will Panuku need to be looking at spending money, or are we going to hand it across as a fully operational and fully maintained operation site?
That's a very good question. The proposal is actually, from Panuku's point of view, as you can see in the paper, we're separating the above ground and the land, if you like, in that Panuku will own the land and the asset, and ATEED will manage the facilities above ground. So Panuku won't be, and the arrangement between ATEED and Panuku is that Panuku won't be up for any more costs than the holding of the land. So your point is a good one, and really the question there is, should we be thinking before we move it across that we use a little bit of the money that is actually still sitting within AFSL to ensure that as it goes across to ATEED and carries on in the industry, being utilised by the industry, that it's fit for purpose, I think is what you're asking.
That's the question.
Yep.
Councillor Holst and myself are asking.
Yep, and I think that's a very reasonable question. And my view would be, and it would be fair to say that while we've been working through this strategy over the last at least 6 to 9 months, if not longer, there's probably been an underspend while everyone's been waiting to work out where we land. AFSL, quite rightly, have probably underspent in terms of maintenance and so forth. So I don't think that's an unreasonable ask to suggest that we ensure that some of the probably deferred maintenance is dealt with. And I'd think about it rather than the quantum of money. I'd think about ensuring that the facilities are fit for purpose, and ATEED will have a very clear view, and the industry will have a clear view about what might be required there.
So rather than putting a resolution with a specific amount, you're giving us the assurance that it will be handed across. And
Chair, I've heard you loud and clear, and I've heard Councillor Holst loud and clear on that one as well. So yes, I can give you that assurance that it will be looked after in that regard.
Councillor Holst, do you have any questions?
And thank you, Mr. Chair, for raising that. I think, and again, on behalf of Councillor Cooper as well, that's something that we've been very concerned about, because although this is heading in the direction that we've always thought it would, we do have a very viable, vibrant and critical film industry to keep servicing out west and working in partnership with the Kumeu Studios. So we do want this fit for purpose until such a stage as we move out. So that does address the issue. I'm happy to actually move the recommendations, Mr. Chair, and I'd just like us to also acknowledge our directors of AFSL. I think this has not been an easy operation, nor has it been straightforward, nor has this always had a huge amount of political support or understanding, but for the people of the West and for the filmies out West and for the huge economic benefit that accrues to the local community, it's been very, very important, and the directors have respected that. And John, thank you for your role in helping hold this together as well. Thank you.
Yes, that was one of the things I was proposing to do at the end, was actually just acknowledge in particular James Hill and Alan Sorrell, who've been long-serving directors and have put the interests of both the industry and the council very much to the fore over a long period of time.
Actually, if I move the recommendations, I'd like to add that as an E, Mr. Chair. I think it would be appropriate to acknowledge them formally.
Do you want to name the directors or just thank the directors?
We'll name them. I think it's appropriate.
I would agree with that, yes.
Yeah, so that was James Hill and, sorry, the other?
Sorrell.
Alan Sorrell.
Alan Sorrell.
Okay. James's brother. And Councillor Wayne Walker?
Sure. Just have a question going forward, and I can appreciate that it may well go to AT's position going forward, but that is around the possible sale of the film studios to the film industry. Does this move preclude that at all?
No, this move doesn't preclude any future decisions that AT or the council may make about who ultimately may own these. No way does this preclude this. We just have to be crystal clear here, though, that the land is being separated away and is coming back into council ownership. It currently sits in the ownership of the AFSL, and that then is consistent with what you've all approved in terms of the Unlock Henderson frameworks. But it certainly doesn't preclude any future involvement.
I understand, and just tying that question into the previous question, which is ensuring that it's fit for purpose. I guess my concern is that it's fit for purpose not simply for its present use going forward around obviously use as a film studio, but also fit for purpose in the sense that that may be an investment to get a better price when and if we offload it.
We can take that into account, I guess, in terms of I'm hearing what you're saying. The question there is, and you have to look at the state of some of those buildings as to whether they've actually got a long-term life. But people with more experience than me would be able to make those judgment calls.
Thank you.
Councillor Casey.
It's just a broken record, John. Sorry, Auckland Council Investments Limited. They may well own land and assets, but they own it on behalf of the people of Auckland. So when I see in a report, ACIL own a film studio, that may be true, but that's not what I want to see written in the report. And I heard a public statement, not a public statement, a statement from the chair similarly saying Panuku will own the land and the assets. Always needs to be added to with on behalf of the people of Auckland.
Got it.
So we're not giving away our assets to strangers, they're still ours.
Got it.
Thank you.
Just merely to our cousins.
Brothers and sisters.
Brothers.
No, it's I need to improve my report writing is what you're telling me. I've got it. I've heard you.
Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Chair John. Just clarifying, your recommendation out of your office is a recommendation, option 4. I'm just trying to reconcile it with the A, because the way I'm reading it, and it might be just my reading of it, John, it's not exactly the same. So your recommendation under option 4 is to transfer the assets, the 100% shareholding of the film studios from ACIL across to Panuku.
No.
To AT.
To on enabling Panuku and. Okay, just clarify then, because you're saying in option 4, you're saying transfer the shares.
Yep. So
what entity?
To the council's the easiest point for a moment in time to then move the assets to. It's really just an unwinding of the company. That's the purpose for transferring the shares, rather than having it being done down in ACIL. It's easy to transfer the whole entity to the council, and then move the land across AT and then into their arrangements, and then wind up the company and free up the cash that's sitting there. There's a significant amount of cash there to distribute back to the council coffers.
Thank you. I understand that.
It's more a process.
And probably just a question. It's not really part of the report, but this takes another responsibility away from ACIL. It leaves it with reading a 6-monthly and an annual report from the airport and dealing with the port. That's a CCO, and I know it's got stripped back directorship and stripped back management costs, but what consideration are we giving with this transfer to the last responsibilities of ACIL, is it worth continuing to operate a CCO with such limited responsibilities?
Clearly, that's not for me to opine on.
I know.
So, sorry, because I was listening, so it is part of the LTP consideration, but also will be part of any reorganisation that we're looking through Phil's side of things, Phil Wilson's side of things. But yeah, that is obviously something we're going to have to be considering, Councillor Darby, because it's stripping it back to just what you've precisely described.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Right, well, there are no more questions, no more comments, so I'll put the resolutions, which are moved by Councillor Hull, seconded by myself, A to E. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Okay. And against. And have we got Ellen Sorrell? Have we got Sorrells? Is that spelt right? Sorry.
S-O-R-R-E-L-L. Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Sorry?
E-double-L.
That's right?
Yeah, it's got it.
Yep. Correct. Okay. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors.
Alina, welcome.
Thank you, councillors. I do not have a presentation, but just by way of background, Drury South Limited is a wholly owned subsidiary of Stevenson's. They are redeveloping a large section of industrial and residential land in the south. They are seeking that a trust be established to manage stormwater reserve. The reasons for wanting a trust established are essentially it's a greenfield site. They want to maintain that parks asset to a very high standard to attract in more business to invest in the area, and that's really the background, and I'm happy to take questions.
Councillor Cashmore, you wish to move this?
Happy to move, Mr Chair.
Oh, seconded by Councillor Philippo.
Oh, I got questions first, just in case.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher will second. Councillor Philippo. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I see on 21, and that's in regards to the maintenance of the property, and you've got in the last sentence that the final quantum will be transferred to the trust. So they'll get all the money to look after the park? Is that what that particular point is saying?
Through the Chair, I'm suggesting that the OPEX, if you like, what it would cost council to normally maintain that stormwater reserve should transfer to the trust. Because it may take a few months to set up that trust, we can report back on the final amount.
Okay, and if the maintenance of the land increases for one reason or another, whose responsibility is it around the OPEX once it is transferred to the trust?
The idea of the trust is if they want to maintain the park to a higher standard than what council's operating expenditure would provide for, they are able to top that up themselves.
Okay, themselves. And just a question on are there any OPEX or costs for the running of the trust from council? Are there any payments to the people who are going to be on the trust? Is there any sort of ongoing OPEX in regards to that?
We can report back on that. At this stage, I have spoken to internal staff from community facilities who have given me that quantum of between $23,000 and $30,000 as a cost estimate of what it would cost council to maintain the reserve. We are not suggesting that any additional money transfer for staff, say for a parks manager or something like that. It is purely to do with what it would cost council to maintain, but we can bring back a further report on the final amount.
It's really just around any monies the council will need to put forward around the 3 members with 2 members appointed by. It's the membership of the trust I'm talking about, the people on there. Are there any costs associated to meeting fees or anything else? Are those costs there, or are we looking at saying, hey, you know, thanks very much for volunteering to go on?
I would bring that back in a further report on the quantum and deal with those matters at that stage.
Okay, and just one more final question. It's on the Māori impact statement, and it's number 24, where you've got here that that the 3 iwi who identified that have an interest in regards to this particular land is that they haven't been specifically consulted on the trust. So can one tell me why they weren't specifically consulted on the trust, especially in regards to membership of? Because as everybody knows here, there's some co-governance models here where we have a group of iwi that, I mean, the Tupuna Maunga Authority is an example. So I have no doubt that so one, why weren't they specifically consulted on the trust? Two, is there an ability for a member of iwi, mana whenua, to be on the trust?
You raise a good question. In terms of the governance model, I've been advised by our governance section of council that we, if we have half of the membership or more being council appointees, that turns it into a CCO or a council-controlled organisation. So that is why I've suggested that the trust should have more members from Drury South Limited than council-appointed people. We have not specifically consulted with iwi, but Drury South Limited does have a good working relationship with them. They consult with all of those three iwi on all of their resource consenting and resource management issues.
Chair, I just raised that particular issue because that is a concern for me, knowing the three mana whenua that are there, and the ability for them to be around the table is so much better than having, hey, look, we just want to have a little chat to you guys.
Yep.
So I raised that particular issue because it may well come up when the trust is formalised in regards to mana whenua being there, especially with the size of this particular piece of land. Thank you.
I think the following speaker may have some thoughts on that as well, Member Take.
Kia ora. I've got two questions. First question, what assurances can be given around the protection of the Hungaya stream through the site and maintaining the level of service for the open space? And I ask this in the context of if mana whenua have any concerns with performance, how would they seek resolution compared to if it was council managed?
Through the Chair, we will be developing a service level agreement, a trust deed and some very clear rights and obligations that are associated with the trust, and that needs to cover a range of issues that you've talked about, also how we deal with complaints or even community groups that may come forward that want to hold activities on the site. So that level of detail will be dealt with in due course. And the streams are incredibly important. The size of the stormwater reserve, you'll see in my report, does refer to the fact that it drains and deals with a wider catchment in paragraph 11. This area is quite critical for how stormwater is actually managed across a much wider area.
So is that an SLA, sorry, Kathy, service level agreement with
the trust?
The three hapu?
With the trust. Between the trust and council, the service level agreement is where we secure how we will actually relate on those issues.
I thought your explanation went a bit wider than just council in terms of service level agreement. So you're saying it won't, service level agreement won't be entered into with Ngāti Tamoho, Akitai and Ngaitai?
The service level agreement would be what council expects the rights and obligations to be between the trust and council. We can certainly bundle up some of those concerns or resource management issues that we have into that document.
My second question is coming around the composition of the trust. I think Councillor Philippine is bang on the money. The three members, two appointed by the Drury South Limited and one appointed by the Auckland Council in consultation with the Franklin Local Board. So I see in the report it makes reference to Andy Baker as one of the options. I know it's not a guarantee, but it's part of the consultation. I would like to see representation on the trust be extended. I take your point around the numbers and it being a CCO, but I don't see iwi or mātāwaka representatives being in that category of council. this is a separate representation issue from Māori, from iwi and Mātāwaka. So I'd like to see a representation on the trust be extended to iwi Mātāwaka of a further 2 members. Given the cultural significance of the area, and to me the best form of kaitiakitanga is actually to be on the governing body, to be on the organisation that makes the decisions, that can monitor the daily activity that goes on. So that's my request, that be considered. Thank you.
You specifically mentioned 2 members.
And we can help you identify those people, but I think I make the point of that it's quite different to council appointing those people. You know, I think it should be the independent Māori state or iwi hapu themselves, particularly Ngāti Tamohua, the Akitai and Ngaitai, that appoint those 2 members.
Kia ora.
It's the best form of kaitiakitanga you can have. You have people in that decision-making forum. Next stage of work.
We'll come back to that, because arguably if it's the Independent Māori Statutory Board, that's not a council appointee anyway, so we'll clarify those things, Member Kake. We have Councillor Casey.
Yeah, it's just along similar lines as my 2 colleagues. Co-management means equal numbers, and 3 is not an equal number. And I would support both colleagues in making that appointment from Mana Whenua. I think that would be quite appropriate. I think that would be something we should be doing as the governors. The other one that bothers me a lot is that the Franklin Local Board agreed to this in principle, provided it was appropriately funded. And you're saying today we're about to sign it off without any idea of what Councillor Filipina asked how much it would cost. We need to know that before we know what we're up for. Because once we sign this off, basically we're ticking off the funding of it as well.
No, C has to come back.
But we're still, this is like cart before the horse, I think. I think once we approve the trust, we're not going to go back on funding 4 or 5 members, 3, 4, 5 members, and their meeting allowances, and whatever else there is. But I mean, you must have an approximate figure of what a trust would cost of 3 members, 4 members, 5 members. A ballpark figure would be good. Up to would be good. Funding up to would be really good for that recommendation.
I actually don't have a ballpark figure on that. Quite simply, we're trying to put the building blocks in place for Drury South Limited being able to redevelop a very big industrial estate. And I've made the recommendation around bringing back the specific funding with a breakdown.
So are Drury South interested in co-funding as well as co-managing?
Drury South Limited are interested in funding any level of service over and above what the council would normally provide to maintain this area of reserve.
I'm talking about the trust itself.
That may come back in the report.
That may come back.
Yes, she makes a valid point, though. She does. She makes a valid trust.
We will, and I mean, under C, I mean, I'm certainly comfortable that we have got that covered, Councillor Casey.
And the Mana Whenua issue, which, I mean, I think 3 members of a co-governing body is inappropriate, because that means the power lies with Drury South. I'm not saying they're going to abuse that power, I'm just saying the power's not equal. So the way that you could equalise it is simply to have a Māori representative.
I think a co-governance model is not being suggested for the reasons I've explained, that if we want to avoid it being a CCO, the numbers have to be more in favour of Drury South Limited than any council appointees. However, we would take a report to the Franklin Local Board if this is approved with some recommendations around governance, and we can certainly talk about the Māori resource management experience and expertise that could be brought to the table alongside any other skill set.
Councillor Darby.
Thanks. Interesting line of inquiry, which is along the lines I was thinking of as well. So I'm hearing that Drury South at 2 and the council appointee at 1. Before Councillor Filipina mentioned the possible place of Mana Whenua representation here, I was thinking of the representation of an appointee of a community group with an environmental focus that might be in this area. Mr. Chair, I look at this catchment, it's enormous, 57 square kilometres of catchment. So we're not just talking about the 85 hectares of stormwater reserve. We're actually, you've really got to be cognizant of the catchment that feeds into that as well. So it's a tremendous responsibility, and I can't help but think that there's an option that maybe hasn't been explored here. We've just looked at business as usual model and 2+1, and I think this is something else that hasn't been explored here. And we do talk a lot about shared governance as opposed to the old model of governance of council, and in this case the principal funding partner, which is the Drury South group. So, Mr. Chair, I'm also of the opinion that we need to explore possibly mana whenua representation and also real community representation that maybe reflects a group that has got a very keen environmental focus. Not sure where we take it.
I put down Councillor Cashmore as the mover, which I assume.
I just think it's too early to go in any of these tracks yet, Mr. Chairman. This is just the start of it. There's further work to be done.
So, Chair, just, I mean, just in light of the comment from Councillor Cashmore, I mean, if we're at the beginning, why then are we putting up B? Because that basically shuts out any other people coming on there. So whether we leave the composition until we end up coming back with C, I just think that there needs to be some corridor around that, Chair. I mean, at least we can appoint a trust be set up. And I take the point that Member Kake said around whether it be mana whenua mata waka, and even what Councillor Darby, has suggested around environmental groups, or a group, is the fact that they're not council, they're not part of council. So maybe that's one way of getting around if we have 6 members, we are now a CCO, because that wouldn't be council appointee, and that's with Mata Waka and Mana Whenua. So I think B needs to be reworded, Chair, in regards to the composition, but a trust be set up, because I think it's a very good way of doing that, is to set the trust up. And then when C comes back to us around the issues that have been raised, we then have a debate around, well, not a debate, because our officer has said that it has to go back to the Franklin local board as well for their input. So, Chair, I just think that B shouldn't be specific in regards to 3 members, 2 members.
Yeah, we do have to name some members in order to set up a trust deed. So we could just add to it, and subject to further advice from Auckland Council's governance team with respect to the most appropriate structure.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, and look, I mean, Jury South Limited can still be in there as named, but it's just the membership around Auckland Council as well. But my late mother always used to say, "Go with the flow."
Yeah. Well, I'm looking for.
Well, here's an idea that might cater. I don't think we should make a decision on the fly like this. We need to have a council representative. We need to have 2 members from Drury South. But if you were to put should comprise at least, including, that leaves us open to then consider further the points of mana whenua and the local group. I don't know all of the ramifications of it, but that might be a compromise that allows us to get this thing going now, but continue that discussion about the potential adding of 2 other members.
Yeah. So I agree that the trust should comprise 3 members. How did you word that?
At least 3 members, including 2 members appointed by Drury South and 1 appointed by.
And then we add on, and subject to further advice from
Yeah,
council.
you could add that on as well.
Governance team with respect to the most appropriate structure. Got that, Mike?
Could do it.
Very good.
So we have Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I was just going to ask a question. Have we ever done this before? Established a trust to manage a proposed stormwater reserve or similar, and therefore what was the trust structure? That's what I was going to ask.
Through the chair, we have the Highbrook model, which is referred to in the report. So that was originally established by Manukau City Council. That model is working quite well. I understand that it has 3 members, and 2 were appointed by the company at the time, and 1 was appointed as a sort of a representative who had expertise in parks management.
So it only had 3 members?
Sure, it's only got 3 members.
Okay. Councillor Hills.
Yes, I understand what everyone's saying, but I mean, in here it says we could just do it the normal council way, apportion budget to do things like we would with any other park, and then the operational money just comes through like any other park through a policy. But the whole point of this is to get an improved outcome, other funding in. You know, we've done it a lot of time, and before my time on the shore, you know, with trusts, separate, who can raise a whole lot more money than council can, because suddenly trusts, businesses, other people want to invest. If it's just a council park, no, or not often, will other people invest their money in that. So, you know, I understand it's good for council to have a bigger say, but the whole point of this is so that we can actually get better outcomes, get, you know, more creative things happening and more budget in there that's not based on rates, which I think is a good idea. So I'm just worried that fiddling too much around with it, we might miss that opportunity, because we could just decide now that it's just another council park that we apportion budget to, and it just happens. But yeah, the whole idea is that it is a majority. If it becomes a CCO, then we're in the same position as well. We can't really get other funding. So what do you need from us now to ensure that we can get the better outcomes?
Through the chair, endorsement of the trust concept and, broadly speaking, those recommendations so that we can kick off and get that underway.
Yeah, I guess my issue is that if you go through that whole process and then suddenly we come back and say we want a different focus, then it kind of, you know, like I'm confused that we're kind of making a decision now. It'll come back and we could throw it back to having majority council, and then the whole point of the trust is actually there's no point in the trust, and we just revert back to a normal council park.
We will ensure it doesn't have a majority of the council.
Right.
Because it will become a CCO, and we don't want that.
So effectively the decision's been made now?
No, because if we believe we can, if we can appoint other people, if other people can join the trust without it becoming a CCO, then we're going to get the advice to agree to that.
Works well.
Yep.
So it'll be a model business park.
Councillor Stewart, Member Honeck, Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, I was going to actually ask a similar question to Councillor Simpson about the makeup of the trust. And knowing Highbrook, it has been run really, really well. And if anybody has been out to Highbrook, they will see that it has. And taking up on Councillor Hill's, I totally agree with him that sometimes trusts can actually get funding that councils or CCOs can't. So thank you. Thank you for all your hard work.
Yeah, I was just a little bit concerned. I was a bit apprehensive when you said that you were going to speak to the Franklin local board about the mana whenua mātāwaka relationship concerning RMA. It sounded like to me that you weren't going to put it to the board that actually it would be quite nice to have mana whenua mātāwaka representation as in governance, as opposed to the usual RMA process.
No, not at all. There would be a further report to the Franklin local board that I would put together with the governance team, and we'd put all the options on the table about trust membership in terms of what is the best mix, that there are people out in the community with expertise in a range of areas, and what is the right representation for the trust from that area.
Keeping in mind that it's been brought up around the table that we're all open to other representation too, not only with mana whenua or Mātā Waka.
Correct.
But are you conducive of having, would you like to seek mana whenua or Mātā Waka on that trust?
I would certainly be writing the report in such a way as to put forward all of the items we've discussed today, that mana whenua representation, people with community expertise, those people from environmental groups should all be considered.
Kia ora.
Councillor Fletcher.
Mr. Chairman, mine is more a question, and it's a question that relates to whether I'm concerned that we try and delay things too much. I mean, it's important that the trust deed is set up appropriately, but we're not being specific enough with the recommendations. So with your A, you've got to agree that a trust be established. Perhaps you go further, that a trust is the most appropriate vehicle for whatever, so that it's quite clear that there's no intention to set up a CCO. And would it be possible under B, and the Mayor's proposal is a good one, but I don't want to see this being delayed. I mean, what I understand the objectives of this is that we are going to give we're going to give the people of South Auckland a higher level of maintenance because of the partnership that we're looking at than they would otherwise have had. So in order to achieve that, I'm wondering whether we could make a bit more progress today with the wording that we've got here, and while you're referencing it back to the council's governance team, perhaps we could invite someone like Member Kake to sign it off, so that we've got the appropriate people, that it doesn't need to come back here in terms of too many stages. Obviously it's got to come back for funding, but in order then that progress can be made, I think B could be subject to the, you could put the most appropriate people in there. But I just see it as just such an, having experienced working on a number of trusts, the opportunity for fundraising and so forth is amazing. To have a commercial partner on board is even more amazing. This is not about sharing the cake, this is about growing the cake, and I'd really like to see us be able to make progress on it in such a way that we're setting a prototype for other initiatives of this kind without them constantly coming back and us all trying to wordsmith it to death. So could you give some consideration to B, enabling to be progressed further?
I hear what you're saying, Councillor Fletcher. I think it's okay at the moment because we've added the extra wording in there to give the flexibility and the consideration for an expansion, because it's quite clear in the report that we don't want to set up a CCO, so I don't think we need to be any more specific about it. I'm going to defer to the mover, and I know you're the seconder, but mover, I mean, are you happy with this?
I think it's fine.
So...
Well, you're giving me the assurance. Can I have the assurance from officers that what we're proposing here is not going to delay the establishment of the trust?
It won't delay the establishment of a trust.
That's fine. I'm happy to support
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Walker, to final comment.
Sure. I'll just make this as a comment rather than a question. And I guess the issue that I would put up is the significant likelihood of future conflict, where quite obviously the major purpose is going to be around stormwater, the likelihood of exacerbated flooding in years to come. We're seeing that everywhere. The circumstance where, sure, it's open space, and yes, there'll be drivers for the use of that open space, but the use of that open space is going to come into increasingly conflict with stormwater. So you'll have a bundle of people on this trust managing an area that's going to be increasingly difficult to manage in the future. The notion that it says up there they're going to be managing, where is it? Manage the 85 hectare stormwater reserve, when in reality their management is going to be much more limited than that, and probably the need to define these things in advance. I see this as a real can of worms, and without a lot of forethought, I think we'll be buying into some problems here, Mr. Chair. So I just want to put that on the table.
Yep.
And I would hope that whatever we do, there will be some clauses around revisiting fit for purpose, because you need to write some sunset clauses, some evaluation clauses into these sorts of things, rather than trying to make them work if they really don't work.
It isn't here. 15 years.
I have full confidence that Alina and the team will make sure that occurs. So we have a mover and we have a seconder and we have the resolutions A, B and C. I'll put them. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
Just want my vote recorded against.
Yep.
Thank you.
Right, we're going to move to item 13 and we'll ask Ella and Eddie to come up, please. Oh, Alistair's back.
Don't be nervous.
Welcome, Ella. Alistair, lead on.
All right. Hello, councillors. This report seeks the exemption of the Te Motua Hiroa Pukatutu Island Governance Trust as a council-controlled organisation. This report is relatively procedural. There is already an existing exemption that is up for review. By way of context, the Local Government Act allows local authorities to exempt CCOs from accountability requirements, where the costs and benefits of imposing those requirements would cancel each other out. So the recommendations suggest that there is agreement to grant a further exemption, and that this exemption will be reviewed in September 2019. But also note that at any time the exemption can be revoked, should it need to be. Open for any questions.
Thank you, Ella. That's fairly up and dry.
I'm happy to move it, Mr. Chairman. I think it's very good.
You are moving, Councillor Simpson. Seconded, Councillor Filipan. Yep. Further, Councillor Fletcher.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to ask Ella, at this time, given that, I mean, this has been a wonderful governance trust, but given that it's always hard to get things on the agenda, is there anything else we should be giving consideration to at this time to save council having additional consideration for the future?
No, the exemption from the CCO requirements is purely procedural. I would say that the governance trust is still in formative phases, and that perhaps it might be appropriate for that trust to report to Environment and Community Committee at a later stage on their progress.
But I would have assumed that would be happening as of right now.
I spoke with, through the chair, sorry, spoke with one of the trustees yesterday, and there hasn't been a great deal of reporting as of today because the level of activity of the trust hasn't been particularly large, but there was a commitment to report to the Environment and Community Committee in the future.
Oh, that's fine. So you can give me the assurance that the accountability provisions are adequate. Oh, that's fine.
Right, we have a mover and a seconder, and we have no further comment or questions. We'll put those resolutions. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you, Ella. Thank you, Alistair. Right, we will move on to a good news story.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
New call?
Jeez.
New call. Mark and Paul we have.
Afternoon, councillors. It's very nice to be here and talk about a good news stories in the technology space. I'll just introduce myself. So my name's Mark Demmer. I'm the Director of ICT. To my right is Paul Thomason, who is the Director of the New Core program. Just want to quickly take you through a quick presentation deck, and then we'll come back to the report. So a little bit about, I'm going to cover off a little bit of old ground, just give you again a bit of a view of what we inherited through ATA and the purpose of New Core. Again, just to talk about what we've actually managed to achieve. As you can see from this, there's shows there's quite a lot of detail in there, and it was pretty messy. Would be probably my summary of the systems architecture that we actually inherited. Pretty much for each council, for each one of the legacy councils that we landed with, there was a different mechanism, different technology set and application set that delivered all of the capabilities. And as you can see from that map, it was pretty complex. Lots of data integration between lots of different system sets. The view on the right-hand side is really where we've managed to end up. So we've managed to consolidate those capabilities into a single platform. And again, this diagram is really just to give you a better view of. It wasn't the easiest place for us to just run day-to-day business on. So the consideration of trying to drive simplicity and value for money out of the merger, this is really what we were driving for. I want to just give you a bit of a use case in context of this particular diagram. If, for an example, you were a citizen who lived in the Manukau region, paying your rates for your property there, beside your dog licence, but you also had a rental property, say, in the Waitakere. If you worked in the city, if you, through the merger of the legacy councils, when you would have come to someone, say, like Bledisloe, to make inquiries, to maybe pay your dog licence fees, the customer services rep would have had to go through multiple systems that they weren't particularly trained on, because they were trained on the Auckland City solution set, for them to then use the Manukau to interrogate dog licence would have been a single system. To then interrogate your rates calculation for Manukau would have been different, yet again differently when you go to look at the rental property in Waitakere. So you can imagine what that customer experience would have been like for you as the customer, but also for the customer service rep. They would have been floating through multiple systems to be able to complete any of the questions that you may have had. The consolidation of New Core has put all that into one capability. So we've now got fully trained customer services reps across the full city who can answer any question no matter where your service is being delivered to you. And that's really one of the key outcomes. And you can imagine the efficiencies and effectiveness that's driven back in our organisation. I'll now hand over to Paul, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about the program.
Thank you, Mark. Just to reiterate again, this will be something which you would have seen before back in 2014 and 15, but the overall mantra and drive for the New Core program was around to consolidate, i.e. go from the many to the one, to then simplify and standardise upon those new systems and processes that we now have across all of Auckland Council. But equally, it also provided the capability for the business to then to be able to optimise. So while we did deliver some of those through New Core, they now have the capability to do much more, especially, for example, in the digital area in terms of how they may wish to interact with their customers. So that capability is now in place to be able to be built upon. On this particular slide, is just showing a view in a slightly different way. We only show it for customer services, which is at the top left-hand side there, but equally those lines you see there would apply to building control, resource management, etc. going down there, but it becomes very difficult to view on the slide if we drew all of those lines in there. But in essence, what that is saying is that there is now a single view and a single system that our people within council are able to operate across. So customer services, for example, anywhere where a customer services person is located is able to see all of Auckland Council, and as Mark has just described, be able to deal with any of the services, queries or requests they may receive from customers. We have around just under 35 or 3,500 people who have been trained, who are able to use the system, whether it be as users or be able to view the system within that. So it's a significant number of people within Auckland Council that have been trained. It's worth pointing out that all of that training, probably 95% of the people who conducted the training, so actually ran the training courses themselves, were Auckland Council people. So there's been a lot of learning and knowledge transfer, and also knowledge retention that's been able to be achieved throughout the new core program as well. So the key things in here is we talk about is around providing that one view of the customer as a key outcome from this. And also that the fact that the work, there's the ability around efficiency, so work can be more easily shared across the whole of the Auckland Council region, where in the past it was more difficult to share it because people were not familiar with the various other systems that existed across the region. So we now have moved beyond that. This particular slide is just to really give a little bit of a view around one, what New Core delivered, but also the fact that it is an enabler for the future, for many of the future things that council wish to do. So around, you can see in that second column, it's a lot of the items have been in place as a foundation architecture in place. We have delivered some online, digital, whatever terminology you like to use, services as well. Or in some cases, we have made sure those services which were only available in some regions of council are now available across all of Auckland Council. So from a New Core perspective, that includes things such as signing up for e-rates, rates, direct debits, paying infringements online as examples, being able to pay some of the consents, licence, renewals, rates, etc. online, dog registration renewal, some licensing applications such as hairdressers and alcohol being able to be online. So there's by no means a breadth of all services provided by council, but we've been able to deliver those and make sure they're available across the region, and clearly there's an ability for that to be an ongoing development to occur in that place. So the foundation and the platform is in place to enable that to occur.
Members, I'll just comment at the moment. Sorry, I'm having to leave. So, but to show my complete endorsement of this matter, I'm going to move the item, and Councillor Simpson is going to second the item, and she's going to take over as chair.
You can't move then leave.
Can. Yep.
Can.
Yep.
I don't think so.
Yep. We can.
Like now, right now. Okay. Oh, right now.
I don't think you can.
Not when the voters.
Not if there's a divided vote, yeah. You can't move something.
Right, we can do that, but actually it's been pointed out to me if there were any amendments, then that does cause a problem. So we're going to, I will pull my endorsement of it, but I will still say I totally endorse it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark.
Don't leave.
So you need
You've got to move it and
you need a mover.
If there's any amendments, the mover and the seconder will remain, I think. So, sorry, gentlemen, to have been interrupted mid-flight. Mark.
Who's going to be mover and seconder? Ross has and I second. Oh. But we're finished.
Just one more slide.
Yeah, a couple slides. Really, the only points to make on this is that the full solution for Nucor has been deployed. We did so last year for Waitakere, what was known as Waitakere, North Shore and Rodney, and this year for the remainder of Auckland Council. So the full solution has been deployed on the number of go-lives within that period. So final milestones, we have handed over back to the business from Nucor program perspective, so that is completed. We do, however, need to complete a project closure report, which is well in train of being completed. We will fully and formally have exited all of our post-go-live support activities this week. As I say, we are actually at that point now. There is a post-implementation review that will be done, which is being organised through our internal audit, and Audit New Zealand also are interested in that, the post-implementation review, so that will occur over the next week or two, and therefore following that, the complete project closure report as well as the benefits realisation plan will be finalised and will be presented to the Audit and Risk Committee at their next meeting in August, I believe. The very last slide is around from the financial perspective. So based on the approved budget we had from November 2014, we will be completing slightly under budget. The CapEx budget for that was 150.9. We will be 1.1 mil beyond that, so that will be 149.8 million, and our OPEX, or operational spend budget, was 6 million, and that will be finishing at 4.3 mil, so all up $2.8 million under the approved budget from November 14. So that's the presentation, and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You deserve a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, questions? Mr Walker, Councillor Walker.
Yeah, just an observation, just to kick things off. And while I understand that we are meeting up with our expectations around the budget that we're dealing with is a dramatically escalated budget. So my understanding is that against the original budget, which was around 71 million, that this project has effectively doubled in cost, even taking into account some additional 20 million. So as a first-term councillor on the Auckland Council from 2010, I certainly attended a number of meetings where there was significant escalation, significant concerns. I know a number of people aren't here anymore that were involved in this project. I do think it's necessary to actually tell the truth, warts and all, and we don't seem to have a very good job of doing that. We keep pushing the reset button. So I just want to make that observation. This has been a project that has escalated significantly, and it's also escalated in terms of the delays. So I just want to put that on the table. I've just got a question, and that's around the savings. So how are we looking at in terms of the savings of the project, and that goes to comparison with the original savings that were forecast back in 2012 as compared to what we're looking at now?
So from the benefit realisation, we're just working through that plan as we speak. And as Paul mentioned, we're going to bring the final plan to the Audit and Risk Committee. It would be fair to say we've already delivered some of the benefits through some of the business locations. And in the technology landscape, we have also started to reduce the number of FTEs that were supporting those legacy systems. So we've already realised some of the cost savings that were identified as part of the original plan. We have quite a robust plan now for the decommissioning, which will save significant amount of money. We're talking multiple millions of dollars as we start to decommission those systems. So we have a roadmap now for those decommissioning activities, and they'll continue over the course of the next 12 months.
If I may, through the Chair, just to add to Mark's response to your questions, Councillor Walker, 2 points. The reset of the new core program in 2014, as you correctly say, there's, those of us that are here talking about it today were not part of that. However, that did address the fact that the root cause of the issues in terms of the budget difference between the start of the project and when it was reset in 2014 was the fact that it wasn't scoped correctly, because it was simply a situation at that point in time, due to some of the legacy system issues that the two gentlemen presenting today have indicated, you didn't know what you didn't know. And that is fact, it happens sometimes. Secondly, to your point around the benefits realisation and savings, I concur with Mark's response to your question, but it would also add that the savings that are expected as a result of new core have already been built into the budgets. The budgets have been reduced accordingly, and they are then part of the overall level of efficiency savings too that we need to obtain each year in order to balance that budget. They will be tracked and reported both to the Audit and Risk Committee, who will take an interest due to the fact that it is Nucor is a key focus review matter for Audit New Zealand as part of their work program, and this committee will also be able to monitor that as we do throughout the LTP discussions.
Thank you, Sue. Did you have a
Hadn't finished, and really just a commendation, and that is that we haven't gone over the escalated budget. So that's a really good thing. Just have a question, and that's around the ability of members of the public to interact, particularly through our website, and that goes to enhanced search engine optimisation, so that you can actually find stuff. How are we going around that?
So, look, Nucor is absolutely, it's a foundation layer. It's bringing all the information to a single source of the truth, and it does allow the digitisation of those services, a much easier proposition for us. So while the benefits are being, that we talk about are really hard savings due to the consolidation project that we've just completed, actually this is the vehicle for us now to do more of the digitisation. So it is definitely a platform that allows us to do a heck of a lot more in the digital space. As examples, things like the bookings. So at the last meeting, we did present around the website consolidation, which actually is part of that consolidation program as well. But there will be more and more opportunities and activities to deliver more services online.
Thank you. Councillor Quacks, your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to acknowledge the comments made by Councillor Walker, because there's been a number of resets in the budget, and so while we now are proudly saying that it has come in within budget, it probably it's a much different budget than we originally saw. But I do support this program, and I think that it's great that we've now got to the stage where we have, and our interaction with the ratepayers of Auckland will be improved. The council staff efficiency will be improved, and hopefully productivity will be improved.
Getting to your question, Councillor.
Yes, I do have a question. I'm coming to a question. So, and I know that the former CEO, Doug Mackay, was very keen on this, and one of the reasons given, or one of the primary reasons given, is because we would be able to decrease our head count. So I wonder if I can get a bit of an update on what this kind of project might do to the council headcount.
So the business case identified a number of FTEs that the project would save for council, and especially in the technology space. We have almost completely delivered the FTE count that was required. The reality, though, is, as a foundation for us to move forward with further efficiency gains through leveraging this new technology, there will be more people savings that will come, but they will be identified through those change projects that it's actually allowed us to move on. So giving you an exact number right now of what the potential FTE, we don't know yet, but what we do know is now with this platform, there will be, you know, a significant number of additional initiatives that will be using this base to drive further cost savings.
Can you just, supplementary, can you just remind us of what, if there were any figures put out on what the FTA savings might be, the FTE savings might be?
I can answer that in terms of in terms of the benefits in Nucor that were there. So there was around, I'll just actually have it here. So in terms of reduced admin support required in planning, reporting and projects, there was around just over $1 million of savings from that within the business case. With regards to more standardised, simplified process and efficiencies that came with that and some of the scale, there was around $4 million or just over $4 million of benefits within that. That as was mentioned, is built into the budgets and has been ensured that that has been achieved within there.
All right, Councillor. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, I've got 3 questions. My first one was just an assurance that the Auckland family includes the 6 CCOs and all are fully integrated into Nucor.
So Nucor was specifically just for Auckland Council, and it doesn't include the water care or Auckland Transport. However, we do provide some shared services to some of the other CCOs, and so Nucor has improved the efficiencies of how we're providing those services to some of those CCOs.
So, yeah, I knew you were going to say that because it was in your report about water care's separate billing system. Is there not a plan to integrate the whole of the Auckland family, including Auckland Transport and water care?
Yep, so we're actively talking to all of the CCOs about a roadmap for the entire family across the full technology suite. So we're building a group-wide ICT strategy, and then we'll plan out how we're all going to merge together. In some areas, for example, like water care and their billing, it is quite different how council bills against a consumptive model that water care use. So it may not be appropriate, but we are in those midst of those conversations to really interrogate what is the right solution across the family suite.
Right. So how much? What's the implications financially of incorporating everybody into our new core system?
We haven't got to that stage yet.
So we're not finished. So we're talking about as if today's the end of it, but it's not really, is it?
So again, Nucor was specifically focused on the Auckland Council, not for the CCOs.
But they are Auckland Council as well. So when you talk about Auckland Council, they are part of it.
Correct.
So we're not finished, are we?
They weren't part of the original scope. But there is now, again, because of this platform, now we're in the second stage of what are the opportunities across the family to become more effective using technology.
So when will you be coming back to us with your next stage report and its funding implications?
So I need to just continue to work with my colleagues. We are now just kicking off this engagement of creating the new corporate strategy. My view is that it's probably going to take us a good few months to get everyone around the table and start designing what that new architecture will look like. So I would expect we're probably around 4 to 5 months away before we can bring something back.
Okay. So you probably answered my second question, which was what happens to the 2.8 million that you saved?
So the capital has been returned to the central governing body, who will allocate those funds to the next appropriate initiative. The operating money that has been returned, again, will be used the same through a governance body called the Investment Group, who look to allocate money for future initiatives that are driving additional cost savings across the group.
So it's not being transferred on to stage 2?
No, they will come back and make a further request for funding.
Okay. And my third question was just about hacking and how vulnerable we are. It's probably not the right question to ask you because it's a risk issue, but we haven't been touched so far.
That is correct.
By the international hacking scandal.
Yes, that is correct. So I also look after the security group who are tasked with keeping us safe. The reality is, like any other organisation, we do have some exposure, but we have quite a robust security process where we have the perimeter. We're fully patched, so we're as secure as we can be. We monitor all of the alerts that we get from the industry about future threats or threats that are current.
Good to hear.
And so again, it's through a bunch of really good people. We're keeping council safe. Like anything, we're also ready to respond on those occasions where something does get through the edge. And what we can do is actually quarantine, devices or computers that have been affected, so they don't then spread the virus or anything across.
If I might, I just had one very last question, and as I've been reading with interest what happened down in Wellington, and I wondered if you've got any learnings from that with regard to the failure of their new IT system.
So we have actually reached out to them to just talk about where they are and see if we can provide any insights on the journey that we've just been through. So we're actively talking to them.
Right, thank you, Councillor. Your Worship.
I will make a very brief comment that we usually throw a lot of brickbats around this table, and when a bouquet is deserved, it should be given. And to you guys and your team, and Sue and her team, the savings on implementation of 2.8 million are impressive. And I've sat through countless new IT schemes at central government. INSIS, the police one, which probably cost $100 million poured down the drain.
Are we asking questions?
But you're guilty of this yourself, Councillor, I'm sure, so you'll give me a little leeway on this occasion, if you don't mind the pun. And Nova Pay and Customs. But what I'd like greater clarification of, and there may be a reason why you're not ready to be as clear as you want to be. It's the questions that have been asked about the ongoing. How much money are we saving on an ongoing basis, both in staffing terms and in dollar terms? I've picked up. You talked about administrative support, 1 million, simplified process, 4 million. But I'm trying to get a ballpark picture. If it's not about the implementation of the scheme, but the ongoing saving of having a proper IT system in place. Can you be a little bit, or maybe Sue could be a little bit more specific about the sort of savings we can expect over time on an annual basis because we have a system that works properly?
Mark, do you want to start first, or
would you want me to? Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The number that you are looking for, Mr Mayor, is $10 million per annum. And that excludes some of the forward work that Mark has articulated that as further benefits that can be obtained, but as yet have not been quantified.
Yeah, well, I think in anybody's terms, a $10 million saving a year is pretty substantial, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah. Just ask a question, Madam Chair. The $70 million a year the council spends on IT costs, salaries, how much is that related to new core and how much is it related to IT generally?
Of the 70 million, sorry, I don't have the exact number, but for the support staff who look after the SAP product, I would say we're talking, that's probably around, say about 15 million in salaries, and then the ongoing support costs that we pay to SAP would be around 5 million. So you may be talking about, say, around 20 million.
So 20 million out of the 70 is related to new core.
Yep, and that is, but this is the core part of the services that council offer.
So I won't be questioning you about the rest of it because it's probably outside your field. Thank you.
All right, Councillor, thank you. Councillor Canchward.
Yeah, very quick. Gentlemen, last term we identified new core with the Office of the Auditor General as a critical risk for council. Bear in mind this project is just about landed successfully, and congratulations to you, well done for that. When will the audit's final report be coming through? Office of the Auditor General's report, do you know that?
Sorry, I'm not aware of the time frame, but it's actively now. So they're waiting for us to finish, they'll wait for us to do the PIR, so the end of the project report, and they'll be waiting for that as an input, I would suggest.
So it's reasonably imminent then?
If I may, through you, Madam Chair, just to add to that, the Auditor General's report would likely be included in their half-year audit to 31 December 2017. We did have at the Audit and Risk Committee last week, we set the expectation of the project closure and post-implementation review report coming to the committee on the 25th of August, being their next meeting. The staff of the Auditor General's Office were in attendance and confirmed that they were comfortable with that and they had no issues.
Right, that's good news. Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Walker, another question.
Yeah, given the success of what we're rolling out, are we getting interest from other councils to pick up on what we're doing? And obviously, we've got a lot of sunk intellectual capital in this.
Yes, we are. So again, we're actively talking to some of the other councils about how they could leverage some of the capability we've created.
No further questions. We'll go into comments. Anyone want to make any comments other than those that have already happened? Councillor Lee.
Yeah. Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
For bringing this saga to an end, hopefully. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that. At the same time, I think while it's human nature to emphasise the positive, especially in councils and the political area, I think we need to be absolutely realistic about this whole affair, because the public has a general idea, not in that much detail, but when you read figures like 1.2 billion in the National Business Review for all of council IT costs since the establishment of the Super City, you get an idea of what the public perception is. And the public perception is not necessarily positive. In fact, they're aware that there has been major blowouts of IT in the new Super City. I understand while 1.2 billion sounds a lot, and it is a lot, a hell of a lot, the council, all of council legacy costs and the legacy councils before the Super City was about 120 million a year. So if you multiply that over 6 years, which the 1.2 billion is, it's a significant figure too, but still only about half of what the Super City IT costs are. And so when you bear in mind that the whole motivation for amalgamation and the Super City was to extract efficiencies and savings, then that's not the brightest achievement of Rodney Hyde's legacy. So I think we need to be clear about that. In regard to New Core, there's been a number of resets, and the real cost of probably over 200 million if you take before the reset or more. But I think we need to go back to the original decision, and that is there was a choice on spending 3 million on upgrading existing legacy systems or 20 million on New Core. And New Core, from that original 20 million, has significantly blown out. So let's not be opening the champagne bottles because the ratepayers will not be. Here's the interesting thing about the alternative decision that was rejected at the start of the Super City, and that is retaining the ARC system. Auckland Transport ended up with the ARC system, and I think they've spent less than 20 million on that, and ATEED would prefer to use that system than New Core. So that was a very bad decision taken at the start of the Super City, but fortunately or unfortunately, the people involved in that decision, that enormously costly decision, have now gone. But in terms of trumpeting our new efficiency, okay, let's not trumpet it too loudly, because it's stuff like that that means that only 18% helps the public when they say only 18% of people have confidence in council decisions. So yes, let's sign it off now, but let's not pretend that this was a great thing In fact, it was the opposite. Thank you.
Alternative
Your
facts.
Worship and councillors, I wasn't going to speak, but I'm just going to close this, seeing nobody else wants to speak. And I just want to say congratulations. You weren't around at the beginning. In my opinion, it wasn't scoped correctly. When it was scoped correctly, we came in on time, under budget, and with some serious savings. I just want to correct, though, I can't help myself, Councillor, the total cost to council is actually only about 600k, not 1.2 billion. 300k from million, sorry, 300 million from Auckland Transport and Water Care. So it also includes the depreciation of 150 million, saving us $10 million a year. $10 million a year. Saw how quickly that could be lost on trains just only a few minutes ago.
Invested.
So, invested. So, look, I just want to say again, thank you very much. And with no further comments, Councillor Clow has moved. I will second the recommendations. I think we don't. Do we need a division? I think we haven't been called for. So.
He's not here.
He's not here. You can't.
That was a
have
point I raised.
I checked. Someone said that was okay.
You can't.
Is it okay?
If there's a divided vote which has been asked for, he's not here to vote.
All right. Well, I'm. Okay. So I'm happy to move then. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Cashmore. We'll change that. Recommendations A and B. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of the public agenda. I'd like to close the public part and move the exclusion of the public and break for lunch. Do I have a seconder for?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. All those in favour say aye. Against? We will break for lunch and come back at 1:35. Thank you very much.